Well, I want to thank you, Sandy. We're with Sandy Kurtzig, and she has very graciously agreed to do an oral history for the Computer History Museum. Thank you very much, Sandy.
Absolutely my pleasure, Gardner.
Good. What I think I'd like to start with is if you could talk a little bit about your early years, your family, what your family did, where you grew up, any brothers and sisters you had, sort of get some idea of the environment in which you grew up.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, I don't take myself too seriously. So I'd have to start with saying I was born at a very early age and, grew to be sort of average height and average weight. But I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and my mother has a degree in journalism from the University of Illinois, and she was a journalist. And she worked for the Oklahoma City Times, and in fact, she worked for the Chicago newspaper as a police beat reporter, which was very unusual for a woman to be a police beat reporter. And in fact, they called her Steve Brody. Steve, as opposed to my maiden name is Brody, B-R-O-D-Y.
Okay.
And they called her Steve because, the male environment didn't quite understand how you can have a police reporter who was a woman. My father was born in Omaha. Unfortunately, he didn't know Warren Buffett, also born in Omaha, and he came from a family where his father left when he was very early on in his career, so he had to work to support his two sisters and mother from a very early age. And he met my mother, would you believe, on a Greyhound bus. And I think the bus was going from New York to Chicago or Chicago to New York. I'm not exactly sure. Omaha, somehow or another, it was somewhere in the Midwest. And my dad happened to have the good fortune, or my mother happened to have the good fortune of sitting next to each other on this Greyhound bus. And by the time that they had arrived, my dad told my mother, "I'm going to marry you someday." To which my mother said, "Nice knowing you, goodbye," in probably typical Brody Kurtzig fashion. And, she was, very well educated. My dad did not have a college degree. And my mother was actually the first one in the family to have a college degree. And I was probably the second one in the family to have a college degree, as a matter of fact. But as obviously fate would luckily have it, my dad prevailed, and he ran after my mother and ran after her till she caught him. And so I was raised in a wonderfully happy family with my dad and my mother, who loved each other dearly. And my mother just died last year at the age of 100.
Wow.
Unfortunately, my dad died earlier at the age of 65 of cancer. Mm-hmm. So didn't have him.
What did your dad do?
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, I have a brother also,
okay,
who is 6 years younger than I am, who is, fabulous, and the two of us are very, very, very close. My dad started off, remember this was during the war, my dad was in the service, and he was an instructor during the service. This was a time when everybody went to the service. It was considered to be the patriotic thing to do. And he was an instructor in the service, and when he got out, they didn't have much money. So my dad had 3 jobs. One of it was being an estimator for, how to do stucco, not stucco, it was lath and plaster. And the other thing, I think he worked for the OPA, which was the Office of Price Administration during the war, where my mother, I think, also worked. But my dad also, when he would come home from 2 jobs, and he would work on building our house by hand. So he actually built our house that we lived in Chicago by hand. He wanted to make sure our family had a house. So I've always been around somebody who's been very, very mechanical inclined, including my brother, who just can look at something that's broken and it gets fixed, which is something that is very rare and something that I think makes it very difficult for other men to be around me because I'm used to my family, my brother and my father being so good at mechanical and things. But My dad then decided to go into the building business. And so he started off by building a few houses in Wilmette, Illinois. And he made a few dollars on building these few houses. He built them mostly by hand, although he did have, obviously, he contracted. And then he made a few dollars in that, and so then he built a few more houses and built a few more. And so I've always been around parents who were entrepreneurial. I never saw anybody in my family who worked at a 9-to-5 job. So, which of course is, if you think about that, when it became time for myself to be an entrepreneur, that was not a foreign idea to me, because I never saw my parents have a job where they went to work and came home at night. My dad would do projects. He would usually build, then own them, sometimes sell them, and then in later years he would just keep them. So he developed quite a very, very good real estate development business in Los Angeles. When I was growing up, my parents made 2 or 3 transcontinental trips from Chicago to California, where at that time we had some family lived out here. And I remember in the car, my mother would tutor me and would homeschool me, because they'd take me out of school for a month at a time. Mm-hmm. And so after the second or third trip that we made across the country, when I was 11 years old, my parents decided to move to California with my brother, who was now about 4 or 5. And fortunately, they took both my brother and I with them. So that's how we got to California.
That's good.
And I think going back to school, I was never a good reader. I think that at some point I remember hearing the story, I don't think I was there, but hearing the story that a teacher told my parents that, well, we need dishwashers in this world, and your daughter doesn't test as high as other students in this class, but there'll be a place for her. And of course that was not acceptable to my mother, who always pushed me to do well. But I also think that it's one of the reasons that I went into math and science. My mother being a journalist, she was obviously very good in English. My dad read everything, even though he wasn't college educated. He read mostly newspapers, magazines. He was always up on the world events. And but in school, because I was a slow reader, I liked math and chemistry and sciences because there was a right or wrong answer. And I studied hard, I got straight A's, usually got straight A's. Maybe there's a B or two sprinkled in there, but for the most part I was a straight A student. But I really studied. It didn't come easy to me to be a good student. I mean, it came easy to me to study and to be a good student, but not to, I had to work at it.
Yes.
Because I wasn't a fast reader. And so I liked the sciences because, once you figured out how to do it, you knew the answer was right or wrong. And whereas with history or English, you never knew if that composition was enough. You never knew if you had studied enough of the history so that you could do well on the test. Mm-hmm. And I also don't have the greatest memory in the world. I think that turns out to be actually, profoundly actually exaggerated, because the fact that I've almost always been the only woman in a room in a business meeting, and so men always knew who I was. And so I don't think I focus as much on learning people's names. I would know who they were, but I wouldn't remember their names. And I'm not sure if that was just a memory problem, or is that I didn't put my heart and soul into it. Because,
it's hard to figure out which one.
They would quickly tell me their name, but they know who I was, so I never had the opportunity to repeat it and, do what you normally do in a cocktail conversation. I think that's an excuse, obviously, for me not remembering names. But that's, so memorizing things like history was never something I enjoyed doing or wanted to do, and have never had a particular passion for anything that takes a lot of memorization.
So foreign languages, which often take a lot of memory to learn the vocabulary.
Yes. That was always very difficult. My mother made me take Latin.
Oh.
And I remember, because Latin had the derivatives of the words, so she thought, well, if I learned that, I'd be able to, learn all these English words then. And I sat behind in this Latin class for, 2 years or whatever it was, 3 years, this desk that said, Latin killed the Romans as now it's killing
Wow.
blank.
Okay.
And I looked at that for 2 years, and I think that, yes.
That's how you felt about
That's
Latin,
how I
too.
felt about Latin also. And, I probably helped me, but I don't really think it did very much good. I did take French, and I could read French relatively well. And when I had to negotiate a contract, when I first started out at Ask, and we had a distributor in France, contracts had to be in French. So I remember being holed up in the Place Athénée, which is not the worst place in the world to be held up in, for a week, working on a French contract, negotiating a French contract in French. So I can, if I had to in business, I could read the French enough, and I can understand enough to know if they're talking about me or what they're saying. And if I had to, I can communicate. But you're right, languages was definitely not something that came easy to me.
Yes.
Luckily, everybody speaks English now, so.
Well, yeah. I think I also have a very bad memory, so languages did not come to me. So I figured that you probably had the same problem.
Yes.
All right. So when you get to high school, now you've moved to L.A.
Yes.
to San Francisco. Where have you moved to in California?
Moved to Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
Into
Now, where are you?
I think we're in Baldwin Hills was where my parents first moved into an apartment.
Okay.
And then from there, my dad built an apartment building that was in West Hollywood.
Okay.
Okay. And so he owned the building, and we had a relatively 3-bedroom apartment that my dad built especially for us. And I remember that there was these starlets that would come and go through this apartment building, and I was kind of fascinated by it because they were all dressed in this makeup and they looked beautiful, and that wasn't on my list at that point of things. And I was also very young, but some of them would sort of take me and put makeup on, and I would have a little bit of that influence having being raised there. I went to LeConte Junior High School, which was, near my house. It was in West Los Angeles. And then, and I swam at that point. I used to, we had a pool. I did laps, so that was how my athletic ability was pretty limited to that. I was never a big athlete. Then when my time for high school, my dad was building a house in Beverly Hills for the family. He's building 3. He'd always sort of build them so they can sell a couple. 3 or 4, I think 3, yes, right. And so I didn't want to have to disrupt my education by starting in Hollywood and then moving. So I went to University High School, but for 2 years I took the bus from West Los Angeles. And I was pretty young at that point because I graduated high school when I was 16. So I was like, probably 13 or something like that, and I was taking the bus by myself. God, that seems young now that I think about it.
Yes.
But
really?
Yeah, maybe I was 14. Maybe it was the last 2. Maybe it was well, anyway, you get the point, okay?
Yeah.
And I would take the bus, have to change buses a few times, and but I think all of those things helped my learning to be independent and having to make decisions for myself and growing up, which is something I also instilled in my sons. I set a role model, but I also, I expected them to be able to do things on their own, and I think that certainly has served them well. That I worked as a working mother, I think they learned that they had to make decisions and usually made good decisions.
Yes, good. Now, were there any teachers at your high school that particularly you remember that influenced you, or?
Well, actually, the teacher that influenced me the most was in junior high school, and his name was Haas, and I'm trying to think of his first name now. But he ran for U.S. Congress.
Oh my goodness!
And I campaigned for him, and this was very exciting. I mean, I learned a little about government, and I got to meet Kennedy, because I think that was the year. And we went door to door, and he lost, unfortunately, but he was a great teacher, and his students I think a lot of the students got very involved in his campaign. Okay. And so that was probably the most influential teacher that I can think of in my junior high school. I think it was history.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Well, there you have it, okay?
Yeah, good.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure now I think about it, it had to be history. And,
yeah.
That was what, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And we were learning history by being out there,
right.
on the campaign trail.
That's very good. So he was very dynamic.
He was dynamic, and he should have won. then in high school, my chemistry teacher was a woman.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about that, but yes, my chemistry teacher was a woman, and she was fabulous. And I've always liked chemistry. I always think of chemistry sort of as my version of cooking, where you put things together and out comes whatever your experiment is. And unfortunately, never really, it never really was something that I developed into cooking skills, but did enjoy chemistry and sciences, and did have a minor in chemistry and a major in mathematics at UCLA.
Okay. So you get to, you graduate. Do you know what you're going to do at this point? Do you, what's the path forward when you graduate high school?
I graduated high school, and my high school was sort of right next to UCLA. And so my parents said, well, you have to go to UCLA. There was never any option. I mean, this is where I went. And except for 1 year, I lived at home. So I never felt I had a high school education, college education. I lived in the dorms one semester, but I think I got a couple B's, and so my parents made me come home. And my parents were very, very strict about my hours. I had a curfew at 11 or maybe even 12, maybe when I got to college. But I was young. Remember, I was young when I was in college.
That's true.
And I did graduate, pretty much top of my class in high school. I went to a public high school, and only about 50% of the high school, because I lived sort of in Beverly Hills, but it was a Beverly Hills it was Los Angeles with a Beverly Hills address or something like that.
Yes.
And so I went to University High School, which was not a Beverly Hills high school. And I did graduate, one of the top in the class. And half the class went to college, and half didn't.
Okay.
But
so it wasn't a college prep.
It wasn't a college prep. No, in fact,
school,
there was no counselors. I don't remember anybody ever asking the question, "What do you want to do?" That was just that. That's when I see my sons and I see even my grandchildren now. I mean, they're worrying about college when they're in kindergarten now. Mm-hmm. Of course, I know there's only one college they should go to, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
There was nothing taught. There's never any subject matter. You had to figure that out yourself about what you needed to take for college. And, I was in a hurry to get out of high school, too. So I graduated actually in 3.5 years or 2.5 years.
So why were you in a hurry? What made you, do you remember why?
No, I think I was finished with high school. I just, done that, time to move on. And not really. I mean, I don't know why. I've always sort of been,
So you must have skipped a couple of grades.
Yeah, I skipped.
At some point.
Yeah, 6. I skipped like only a half. I think I started early. Was always in accelerated classes, and then I graduated a half a year early. So for some reason I was 16.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Which was
Whatever.
young. Which is part of the reason why parents were so protective. Okay.
Okay.
And went to UCLA and majored in math. I don't think there was ever any thought about majoring in anything else. For some reason, I mean, that was what I was good in, was math.
Yeah.
So that was
you
my major.
In what you could do well. Yes.
Right. And I did work every summer. I worked even when I was in high school. I lied about my age so I can work at Bullock's department store, because you had to have a work permit or something if you were under 16. And so I said I was 16, even though I wasn't. So I worked summers from the time I was a junior in high school.
Okay.
And then I worked every summer when I was in college. Most of that I worked at TRW Systems in Redondo Beach,
yes.
which was where I worked part-time during school, and I worked all the summers.
So what were you doing there?
I was in a department with 14 or 15 PhDs in aeronautical engineering.
Okay.
And they were working on various problems. And at that point, there was just starting, there was obviously mainframe computers, and these engineers would explain their problem to these, was sort of a closed shop programming, where they would explain their problem to a programmer, and he would go back and work on it for months and then come back with some answer. Mm-hmm. And I was, basically writing numbers on a piece of paper and trying to do all the analytic work to help them analyze these problems that they were working on. And I was a protege to these engineers that were all pretty much all PhDs.
Okay.
And so that was when it came time to graduate school. So when I was in UCLA, I was in math, as I said, a math major, but it was very theoretical math.
Okay.
And the teacher would get up and they would prove the existence and uniqueness of this theorem and that theorem. And I found this sort of tedious because I would say, well, how would you use that? Okay,
yes,
that's
right.
wonderful. I'm glad you proved it, but how would you use it? And they would sort of give you this look because we were not here to use it applied. This is just supposed to be beautiful, and
Yes,
And so I had did you have that same issue?
I understand.
Okay.
Yes.
So I, was able to do what I had to do, obviously, but I certainly didn't find it particularly rewarding not knowing how I would ever use this math. So having the experience of working at TRW, where I was with these engineers who were solving real aeronautical problems.
Yes.
I mean,
and there was math involved.
And there was
Absolutely.
math involved, but it was really applying the math that I had learned to figuring out, where would, if you had an arc, and you had a propelling a plane, where would it land, or where a missile would land?
Yeah, whatever.
We're actually working on missiles. Where would a missile land if it was directed in this direction at this, so forth. So I actually saw how the math that I had been learning could be applied. And so when it came time to go to graduate school, and I needed a major, what was I going to major in? I knew it wasn't going to be in theoretical math.
Right.
And all these engineers said, well, you need to, go into aeronautical engineering because you're going to see real application of math in aeronautical engineering. And why don't you go to Stanford? And I said, okay.
Really?
My parents would never let me go to Berkeley because there's too many radicals there, not knowing, of course, that there were just as many radicals at Stanford. And so fortunately, I got a fellowship to Stanford, and that's where I went to graduate school, and it was my...
Did you apply any place else?
No, actually. I think about it now. No, I don't think I applied anywhere else.
Okay.
I think that the interesting thing was that the one thing I didn't apply anywhere else other than Stanford, and I applied for a fellowship that Stanford thought I would definitely get. It was called the Amelia Earhart Fellowship, but I didn't get that fellowship. And it turned out that fellowships then had whoever donated the money for the fellowships could stipulate certain terms, and you had to be an undergraduate engineering major, and I was not. I was a math and science. So even though there's only 2 women and 250 men at Stanford in aeronautical engineering, I was not qualified for this particular fellowship that had this stipulation. And of course, there's nothing around, you couldn't go around it because the person who had endowed it was dead.
Yes.
So I had to work all summer to make money to try to afford to go to Stanford. And fortunately, Stanford sort of felt a little bit responsible because, they had said, oh, you're obviously going to get this fellowship, so here, get this. That they found a fellowship for me. So when I got to Stanford, I was very fortunate in having a fellowship.
Okay.
And as I said, TRW paid for most of my education, my undergraduate education, which was not very expensive then. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
at UCLA,
exactly. Tuition was
not very expensive.
And you lived at home.
And I lived at home, and I was a California resident, so it just
all good.
it was all good.
All right. Okay. So really, I was curious. I knew you had switched from math to aeronautical engineering, and I had to understand what happened.
Yeah. Well,
because it seemed strange, but it was all because of the influence of your summer jobs.
Yep. And the other 2 influences, which are really important, I think, for anybody who's viewing this, especially young women, is that one of my summers I said I worked every summer, and one summer I was very fortunate to get a job at the UCLA Computer Center.
Oh.
And this UCLA Computer Center had mainframe computers. The center was down in the dungeon. I think of it being underground. It was probably in a basement, but there were no windows because at that point they had raised floors for computers. Remember that, obviously.
Exactly.
Raised floors, and all this air conditioning and cooling systems, and because a computer that is not even as powerful as what's on. Well, I don't have my Apple Watch on right now. But not as powerful as what's on your watch. Would take up a whole mass of rooms, air conditioned, as the Stratus computers did at that point too, I think.
Yes.
And there were all these geeks, that were working there, and they were, working in assembly language and these esoteric and COBOL, these esoteric languages that I said there is no way I'd ever go into computers. I mean, if this was a course instead of a summer job, I probably would have failed out. But luckily,
So what did you do? What did you do in this computer center?
Well, I had some job. I don't even remember now what it was, but I was supposed to be doing programming, and I did do programming. I remember, programming on can you believe that far back, on punch cards, because they were mainframe computers. And so I was actually using punch cards. I had to put all my programs onto punch cards and, keep punching myself. Sometimes I had key punch operators who would do it for me, but you'd put it through the machine, and you'd get back, and it was you'd have one error, you'd have to start all over again, okay, and then that would be another hour waiting in line until your program got put through, and you can see the results in piles of paper. And I think I was solving some sort of a problem that, a professor had set out that there was an important problem that had to be solved, which I don't even recall now. I think it was.
Okay. But so you ended up, you were doing some programming there.
I was doing programming.
So you were introduced.
Yes,
you knew
I was introduced.
How computers work and how programming works.
Yeah,
so
and I hated it.
You did get that.
There was no way I was ever going to go into programming.
Yeah, okay. So whether you
so
didn't like it,
fast forward a little bit.
You knew it.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Fast forward to working at TRW Systems.
Yes.
Where again, it was closed shop programming. The engineers would give the problems to these, obviously very talented programmers, and they would work on the problem. And same way I was working on it in the computer lab. And at this time, a GE timesharing terminal showed up in the corner somehow. And here was like a teletype terminal that that you actually can put your program, and it was connected by a telephone somewhere, and you can write your program in BASIC language, and then later I think in Fortran, but BASIC at that point, and you could run it through, and if there was a mistake, you can fix it right away, and you stored your program on paper tape, all these little, this paper tape drive, and you were able to do pretty complex programming in this basic language. And that was my first introduction where I said, hey, this is kind of cool. I can write these programs, I can get these answers, and I can solve these problems, and And you
didn't have any trouble learning BASIC?
I didn't have any trouble learning it, and it was fun, and I was able to solve these problems that were taking months to be solved by these programmers in the closed shop programming. I could solve on this terminal.
Wow.
So that was where I started really getting interested in computers, and specifically in the GE timesharing computers.
Okay.
So when I graduated, then I went to graduate school in aeronautical engineering, and I did get some very prestigious job offers from Lincoln Labs in Boston, and from Bell Laboratories, which was one of the most prestigious research institutions in the world, where the ratio of the ratio of doctor to patient was like 4-to-1, meaning PhDs to real
non-PhDs,
people, non-PhDs, and I know you know this, but the buildings at Bell Laboratories was one of the most distinguished. Is it still around?
No, they finally closed it.
Okay,
but it survived a long time.
Yeah, Murray Hill and Whippany, and but there were like I think 4 different Bell Labs, and I had actually an interview at the most prestigious one. That was all a think tank. It was a think tank actually.
Yeah.
And it was in very cold weather in New Jersey, which is how one of the reasons I got back to New Jersey. And these buildings had bars on the windows. I don't know why the windows had bars. Is there some? You might know. But
no, I don't.
It was weird.
But you noticed it for
yes,
sure.
I did. and they were all brick, which of course to me was very foreign from the stucco environment of California and
Right.
the free, short sleeve blouses and so forth that I grew up in. And so I had this interview, and it was a very old building, and these very, very smart engineers were there. And I remember walking down the hall. I think maybe I was going to the bathroom or something, but I was walking down the hall, and I saw this one guy in particular walk down the hall, walk into the drinking fountain, say, "Excuse me," and keep walking. And I said, "This is not the place I want to be. This is weird." I mean, I think he was just so into what he was thinking about.
What he was doing?
Whatever he was doing, that he just, his mind was just, trying to get from one point to the other point. There was, just didn't even think about it. It wasn't a person, it was a drinking fountain. He just said, "Excuse me," too. And sort of said, this is not what I want to do, okay?
I don't want to be with these people.
No, this is not my life calling. And so I said, well, maybe I should, I loved GE, I loved the timesharing environment. Maybe I can go get a job at GE Timesharing. And they had an office in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Okay.
And I said, maybe I could sell this stuff. I mean, I'm really passionate about it. Maybe I could sell it to other people. They must have salesmen. I don't know what they would do, but,
Yep. Okay.
And so I called, and they says, "No, I'm sorry, we're not hiring." And I said, "Well, that's not acceptable answer to me." And so I drove to Teaneck, New Jersey, and said I wanted to see the district sales manager. And the secretary said, "I'm sorry, he's busy, his calendar's full." And I said, "Well, I'll just sit here and wait, just in case he gets a moment or two." And I remember, just sitting outside his office for like 3 or 4 hours, because I wanted to meet with this guy, and I wanted a job at GE, and I felt I had the qualifications. I think having a science background is really important.
Yeah,
And
because the customer,
I had a degree
half
from
the customers are going to be
That's right.
the people,
I
like
knew
the
some-
people at TRW that you work with.
That's
Yeah.
right.
That-
So, I had a degree, and I think it's really important to get a background in science, math, computer. You can never tell. I mean, that's just really an important background.
Good.
And so went to good schools, and I got good grades, and I looked presentable. I made sure that I dressed, appropriately, so that there was, no doubt that I was there for business. And finally, he interviewed me and gave me a job on the spot. So I guess, persistence is one. Okay?
Yes, very good.
And I think that in looking back, this is something that I definitely would recommend to women or men that get a very, very solid science background and go into sales, because as at least some experience level. And the reason sales is so good is because you have to learn your product. So that's, really important. 2, you have to learn how to communicate. When you're selling something, if you can't understand the product and can't sell your product and yourself, because you sell yourself first and then you sell your product, okay?
Right.
And you learn how to communicate. And 2, you really get a lot of background in the company. You learn about your company, you learn about other people's companies, so you can see other companies you like. And I think one of the most significant things I did was take my science and background and go into sales for GE.
Okay, very good. Wow.
So
I like the fact that you went all the way across the country to.
Well, I went across the country because I got married. Okay.
Oh, well then, now we
missed
need
something
to.
there.
Okay, now let's
Yes.
roll back a little bit.
Roll back a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
So
Tell me
I
about
met
that.
Ari Kurtzig at Stanford. He was working on his PhD. He was also young. He got his PhD at 24.
Ooh.
And he was working on his PhD under Shockley, William Shockley.
Oh,
He was
very good.
Got the Nobel Prize for the transistor.
Yeah.
And Shockley was sort of a curmudgeon who went into various advocations later in life that probably are not his most stellar thing.
Yes.
But he'd have students that he never would pass. And Ari was actually the first graduate student who actually achieved a PhD under Shockley.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
And so Ari was finishing up his PhD as I was doing my master's. I actually was going to go on for a PhD. My intention was to go on for a PhD, which I will tell that story if you'd like to hear it.
Yes.
Okay. So I met there, and he went off to actually go to Bell Laboratories at Murray Hill, and thought, he was
Now,
going to go
what was
out to the
his
world.
field?
His field was solid state physics.
Solid? Yes, okay.
Okay.
That would
Something you would know very well.
Yes, compute very well with Shockley, yes. Okay.
So I should mention that, and Shockley was very involved with Bell Labs as well, so that's the connection.
Well, that's
there.
where he came from.
Oh, that's where he came from. I forgot
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for filling me in.
Okay.
Okay, that I forgot. These things I will mention that at the Aero Engineering at Stanford, I might have mentioned this, that there were 250 students in that class because Aero Engineering was very popular at that point.
Yes.
There was a lot of aerospace work being done. It was, right before we landed on the moon, I guess.
Yeah.
No, it was after. Okay, after we landed on the moon, I think. But so everybody was going into that. It was very, very interesting. And so there's 250 people, and there were 2 women, myself and one other.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
I
Now, you said that you had thought about going on. So
Yes.
So you met your future husband at Stanford, okay, and he was a PhD student. So tell me about thinking about going on.
Well, I actually
Why didn't you?
I
Yeah.
actually intended to get my PhD in
Okay,
aeronautical engineering. And I had to work the summer to make the money to be able to afford Stanford because I didn't think I was getting a fellowship.
Right.
So I had this money, and I was going to have a summer job right after I got my master's at IBM.
Ah.
This is sort of a knock on IBM, but I will tell the story anyway because
That's okay.
I've never gotten paid from IBM. They owe me a day's pay with
Okay.
interest for all these years. Okay, so you'll have that on record that
Okay.
I'm still waiting for my paycheck. But I accepted a summer job there with the idea. Excuse me, it was more than a summer job, but the idea that I could work part-time during the school year and continue on with my PhD. At
So you were
Stanford.
going, yes, so this way you could finance your studying
Exactly.
all the way through your PhD.
Exactly. So
And they were amenable to this?
that was
Okay.
the deal. The
You
deal
had a
was
deal.
the deal was that I would go to my training over the summer. That's right. I actually took a job with them, and I was going to go to my training over the summer. In LA, they had a particular program that started at the right time, and that then I would go back then in the fall. You know how classes, when you're working on your PhD, they're year long. You can't start in the second semester. You have to start a course. It's usually A, B, and C if you're
Yeah,
on quarters or
absolutely.
A, B. And so I was going to do the training that IBM wanted me to do. They had a very good training program, which was one of my interests. And of course, IBM was IBM. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where.
Now, what were you going to do with IBM? What was your
I'm trying to
job?
remember what the job actually was. As I said, I worked for them for one day, maybe 2 days, but one day at least. But it was something. It was something in the science. Maybe it was
Okay.
in being probably. I was probably going to be a systems support
Analyst
person
or something,
Yeah,
yes,
so
okay.
one of the support to
to the
engineers
field
or whatever. Yeah, a field
Okay.
engineer in some way. I was going to be in the field definitely.
It was in the field. Okay.
It was in the field.
All
yeah.
right.
So that's why I already had thought that I wanted to go into the field, into working with customers at that point.
Okay.
So remember, I had done some interviewing and then so I knew I just did want to do that. Now you're bringing back my memories here.
That's
but
okay.
so I was supposed to. They had 3 things. One is I can go back to school and work part time and go to school part time. And 2, I can do the training during the summer. And there was a third thing that I don't remember what it was now, but there was a third strike I remember. And I showed up as I was supposed to in the office in Palo Alto. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to go to the LA class. You're going to have to go to the class in San Francisco, and it's not going to start to a point where I would be missing the first quarter of my.
Oh my goodness!
of
They
Stanford."
delayed the yes.
Yeah, that was somehow or another. I don't know why I couldn't do the one in LA because that had all been planned, and I
Yeah.
showed up the very first day, and they said that. And then I think the assignment, it was supposed to be on a Lockheed account or some account that made sense. That was the third thing. And they said, oh, you're not going to be on that account. You're going to be on this account. So, it was sort of 3 strikes and you're out. And I just said one day, I said, this is not what I want to do. I want to go back to school.
Yeah, right.
And
this is not making it easy to happen.
So I quit, and after one day, so I probably had one of the shortest longevities at IBM. And then because I had the rest of the summer now, and I had this money, from having worked the summer before,
you'd save some money.
I decided to go to Europe. And for the summer, because I'd never been to Europe, I'd never been outside of the States, and so I went to Europe, and
on your own or with friends?
On my own. I went on a tour. My parents never let me go by myself. I went on a tour. I was by myself.
For an independent person, they were incredibly protective of somebody who could.
That's why I was so independent. But whatever. I was independent within these.
Very these
opinionated walls, I think, I might say. But I went on, the group there was enough flexibility. I could do what I wanted to, and I enjoyed it. It was tremendously a great group. And I think that was much better than going by myself anyway, because there were other people my age.
Okay.
So I went on this tour, and when I came back through New York, Ari proposed to me. So that was the end of my
he proposed to you. Now you've been gone all for the summer.
I've been gone for the summer.
Yeah, he's missing you, and I get it.
Okay. So that's how I ended up moving at that point to New Jersey, and interviewing with Bell Labs.
Okay.
Which was.
So now you're living with Ari in New Jersey, and
we're living.
Now I get it completely.
Yes, we're living. We're our first apartment was in Short Hills.
Oh, I know Short Hills.
Anybody who knows Short Hills, you think of big houses and lots of money. Okay,
right?
That's not us. Okay, there is the Erie Lackawanna train track, and that train goes from New Jersey to New York.
Yes.
And it's the commuter train for people living in New Jersey in those nice houses. And I lived literally on the train tracks. Here's all the nice houses, here's the train tracks, and then there's Morris Turnpike that had apartment buildings. And I lived in an apartment building, and the train went right through our apartment. We didn't have to have an alarm clock because the train would wake us up in the morning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so that's where we lived.
Okay. Cool.
And we lived there for 3 years, and I said, "Look, I'm not a New York, New Jersey type of person. I've now been raised in California since I was 11, and I really want to, that's where I feel comfortable. But I will try it out for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, my deal was that if I don't like it, you'll look for a job in California."
Okay.
And he says, "Okay, that's a good enough deal." So that's where we went. And I think the point here is that, when you look, I've always been very directed. I've always been, first of all, honest with whoever I'm with. These are my priorities.
Yeah.
Because I think often people are not honest with their partners or with their employees. And, I said, I will try this, but it just does not feel like it's something I'm going to be comfortable with. Cold weather is not what I like.
Yes.
And this environment, with these brick buildings, and living on the train tracks is not really what I think I'm going to enjoy. But I will, obviously I'm very in love with you, but this is not, we need to have some sort of... we need to have some sort of parameters.
Let's try to...
So, and that's something that I've always been very with what were important to me. Because I felt as I wasn't happy, my partner's not going to be happy, my kids aren't going to be happy. And so I try to really think about what is it that's going to make me happy. Right. And what's going to, and also what's going to make people around me happy, and to make sure that worked with them, because I think, life is sort of a give and take in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So
a lot of compromise.
A lot of compromises.
Right.
Okay. I wasn't good in English, so I figured out something I could be good in.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
so we both were in New Jersey, living in this one apartment, and had a great job at GE.
Okay,
Really
so you did
loved
get
it.
that job.
I got that job.
Relatively soon after you got there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
And
you're selling timeshare.
and it was wonderful. I got to do all kinds of interesting clients. I was very successful. I was usually one of the top producers, if not the top producer, every quarter. And that's where I got to meet with customers who said, well, gee, we have this problem to solve. Can you help us solve it? And I was selling the raw timesharing. I wasn't selling programming.
I understand.
Okay? Here's your terminal. Here's some canned programs. Here's a book of canned programs you can use. If they don't fit, you can program it yourself.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And some of them would say, well, look, that's all fine, but we don't know how to program and we don't have the time to do it.
Yeah. Lot of you, we don't have the time to do it.
And we don't have the time to do it because there's lots of small companies. And, I was just carrying a bag. I was a salesperson going, basically trying to find people to use this newfangled thing. And they said, well, if you could tell me your problems, I would ask them. And they said, well, this is a problem we really have. If someone can solve this problem for us, we'll buy your services. And there were various problems. There were problems like, General Foam, which was a division of, I forget now, they were a division of a large chemical company.
Okay.
And they made this foam that they then had lasers that cut the foam into various sizes to be used for different applications. And they said, we need something that would help us figure out how to optimize the cuts on this foam.
So to get the most pieces.
The most pieces out of this.
They could sell out of a given sheet of foam. Got it.
And there were other applications like that. And so I would, on the weekends and at night, I would go home and write these programs for these customers. And they would then, well, actually, yes, I have to go back a second on this story because, but that's basic. So I started writing these programs and then they would use them and then I would get, the more they used it, I got a commission on what they were using.
Yes, then they bought the timesharing system.
They bought the timesharing.
Because it solved their problem.
So I have to give you a little story before that. My first assignment with GE timesharing was, would you believe, as probably you will, was to service the engineers at Bell Laboratories Murray Hill. Okay.
Okay.
Because GE was starting to get, just like at TRW, sell these terminals to these engineers.
Yeah.
And these engineers, they'd put them around, and these engineers would start using them. And so with my background, I think, it was very appropriate that they said, this is the customer you're going to service is Bell Laboratories
With your science background and your math background, you could talk to the customer and actually understand what the customer said.
Yeah, usually they were really over my head.
But theory, you could relate to them.
I had gotten a job offer from them, so in theory I could. Okay?
Yes, okay.
And I could fool them enough to listen to their problems, okay? So that was my first assignment, was to go and try to get as much GE timesharing in Bell Laboratories Murray Hill.
Okay.
And I did a very, very good job at that, and I was very excited because, the was growing, the revenue was growing from this GE timesharing, more terminals were going into the building, more usage by the engineers, and the engineers were happy because they didn't have to go down into the basement to their closed-shop programming. They could get these answers themselves, and I'd be writing programs to help them, or I would show them how to use the programs because they had so many scientific issues that there were scientific galleries of applications that they could use.
Right.
So, everybody was happy, and I was, this actually worked for me. Maybe I wasn't as smart enough to be an engineer there. At least I didn't think I was. I think women sometimes don't have the self-confidence that they should. Mm-hmm. And I must be. Maybe I was one of those. But being able to sell this service and sell it well, and because I had used it myself, I knew it was pretty good. And then after, I don't know how long I was there, but long enough, I got called in by, my boss, who name is Dennis Gazzazza. I remember him being a very, very proactive, wonderful boss. And I thought, oh, I am going to get some sort of, attaboys because I've done such a great job. And I was very excited. I think I even dressed because, I was going to have
because
this
it was
meeting
scheduled.
with I was going to this meeting with this my boss, and I was very excited about it. And he says, sit down, close the door. Really? Okay. He says, we have a problem here. What's the problem? I'm giving all this revenue and everything is great and everybody loves what we're doing. He says, that's the problem. What do you mean? How can that be a problem? And I'm sort of getting very tense. What's going on here? It turns out that GE, big GE, there's two different divisions of GE. There's GE that you'll identify, which is sold the big computers.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay? And those were the computers that were in the basement of Murray Hill.
Right. And another division of GE is
called
competing.
GE Timesharing sold the terminals.
Of course. Totally
and there was also
different
another
business.
division, of course, that sold light bulbs and machinery and everything else. But let's focus on these two. And GE, big GE, that sold these big computers that cost millions, hundreds, well, maybe, I don't know how much then, tens of millions of dollars for these big machines. They were systematically selling more and more of these big machines for the basement category. That was their job. And here I was with my 10,000, 15,000, whatever it was that I was, drumming up on the GE timesharing business was eating into them selling more computers because anything that was offloaded from these big machines onto these timesharing machines was taking away from their next big machine they were going to buy.
Yes.
So they basically said, we're taking you off of Bell Labs because you're being too successful. So you can imagine how I felt. This is
my goodness.
This is sort of my really first entree into...
It's your first full-time job?
My first full-time job.
As opposed to a summer job while school.
Yeah.
Wow.
I had another job for a very short time that I got fired from. So I got fired from sort of two jobs, okay?
Okay.
And but let me finish this.
Finish this story and then we're going back.
I'll go back a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Because that one's sort of interesting, and I don't really even know the name, but I'll tell you about that. Since you want to, do you want to hear this stuff?
Absolutely.
I think this stuff sort of, the thing is you have to keep going. You have to, whatever's worth doing, you need to have to sort of work at it. So I'm sure, I don't think I cried because I'm very good at not crying in business meetings, but I'm sure it was welling up in me and I was very, you can just imagine, I knew I was doing well and I thought I was going to get this, all these attaboys and accolades and maybe a raise or whatever. And here he's telling me, we're taking you off of that because you're doing too well. How do you compute that?
Yes,
It's sort of, a really, difficult thing to do. There's something wrong there. But I picked myself up and he says, we're giving you other assignments. And those were the assignments where I actually went out and worked with all these different customers. And I did very well with that. And in fact, I remember General Foam is the one who had a plant somewhere and they flew me by helicopter, very exciting, to their different plants to sort of walk around, understand their business and help them write software. And I thought, this is kind of cool.
That's very cool.
That was really cool.
Probably never been in a helicopter before.
Of course not.
Of course not.
I didn't tell my parents; they would never have allowed it. But that was, so I really had these great experiences. So the other job that I got fired from, when I first moved out to New Jersey, I didn't have a job, and there was this company very close to our house. It was just starting up, and they were doing something in computers. I actually don't even remember now. It was a startup. I was supposed to be doing some programming, which is, sort of my background, for the startup. And they really didn't have their act together, and I sort of spent a lot of time, not doing too much because they weren't doing too, they were
they weren't organized enough.
It wasn't organized, but it was a startup. And I think it was sort of whatever I was trying to do probably wasn't that successful because, it just. But I remember what happened is that they got around to, their lawyers must have told them, you have to have everybody sign. It was sign a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement.
Ah.
So they gave me this agreement, and I wasn't, legally savvy. I'd never had to sign one before. And in it said that you can't work for another company in the computer field or whatever. I mean, it was a pretty broad statement.
Oh yeah, they
used to have them
tended to have very broad statements.
Very broad statement.
Turns out they didn't tend to be very enforceable. But boy,
they did not turn to enforceable.
Yeah, they were
in
not.
Most states. In most states, later on I realized in most states they were not
but
enforceable.
how do you know?
I didn't know that. I was young, and I'm reading this thing, and my first job, really, and it says, you can't, what you couldn't do, and I'm saying, gee, what if this is a startup? What if this doesn't work? And this doesn't seem right. And so I said, I really have a hard time signing this. And they said, if you don't sign it, you're fired. And, I guess, for some reason, I chose the route of I can't sign this. I don't feel comfortable with it. I didn't think of going to a lawyer. I don't know. At that point,
you just made up your mind.
They just said, everybody has to sign this, or otherwise I can't work here. And, it was, I know the company's out of business, so it didn't last very long. Their lawyers probably said, you have to get everybody to sign this. And I don't even know what they were trying to develop, but whatever it was not successful.
Yeah.
But I just decided, look, this is not how I want to start my career. And this doesn't fit well with me.
Okay.
So I did have that experience before the GE.
So
now I had GE, and then I just now had this bad experience at GE where I had done well, very excited, and but coming around, I now ended up with a territory and started meeting with all these different customers. One of my customers was the pharmaceutical company. Oh God.
Well, Johnson & Johnson is very close.
Yeah,
to
but
there,
it wasn't Johnson & Johnson. It was
New Jersey.
It was Merck.
Oh, okay.
And there was a person there named Leidixon. I'm bringing back these memories for some of you. Okay, who was vice president, and for some reason I was doing work with his department, and again my chemistry too. So, and that was really successful. And then I had a lot of other companies where I started writing programs for them, even though that wasn't part of my job.
Yes, right.
And I did become one of the top salespeople for all of GE timesharing, and was the national speaker for them.
Wow.
One year, which was really, which was really exciting.
Well,
so that was a great beginning for me.
That was,
Yeah.
and you figured out that you knew how to program, and that helping them solve their problems would make more sales.
That's exactly right.
And so
That's what I did.
That's what you did, and it worked.
Yep.
Very good. All right, good.
So how did I get to California?
So now you're working for GE still.
Yes.
Okay.
And remember I said 3 years I would give the East Coast.
Right.
And it was 3 years. It was
Okay.
time to consider moving back to California. Told my husband that, I want to go back to California, and he at first was very resistant, but finally decided he would try to find a job, and it wasn't a good job market, but he did find a job, and so he had the job, and I just asked to be transferred with GE, so I actually stayed with GE. And came back out here and selling in the Palo Alto office.
Okay. Yeah.
So I did that and continued sort of the same, way that I was doing, and would work with customers and help them program and so forth. And I came across a couple customers that said, we have this problem. There's nothing here that would help us with that problem, and it's inventory control. We need to have a better way of keeping track of what goes into our product, our inventory. Could you write a program? And so I wrote a program for them on the GE timesharing, and that worked, pretty well. And I'm trying to think of the transition here for a second, because somehow. Okay, so I did that on the GE timesharing.
Right.
And then I started, doing that. And then it was time to, I thought, okay, it's time to have a baby. I want to have some children. My priority has always been family first, business second,
Yep.
and
Okay.
rest next.
Okay. And your husband's fine
and,
with that?
Yep. And
what was he doing now?
He was at that point he was at ITEL for a while, and then he went to Hewlett Packard. So he was at Hewlett Packard at that point.
Oh, okay. So he eventually did get
yeah.
a good job at a good company.
Oh yeah, he had a job at a good company before we moved out. Yeah.
Oh, he had the ITEL.
He had the ITEL. Remember that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember that. Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, good. Okay.
Not the greatest company, but anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, but Hewlett Packard is.
Hewlett Packard.
definitely
He
was
went to Hewlett Packard after a year. Yeah, ITEL didn't live very long. Anyway, so he had a job, and it was time, to have a family, and I wanted to have a family, and so I thought, well, gee, maybe I could quit and go into writing programs for these companies that are asking me to write programs.
Because you could do that at home.
Because I could do that at home.
Don't have to be on the road.
Okay. Time-sharing terminal, can put that in my second bedroom, can do that. And so I decided to leave. I guess one of the reasons I decided to leave, which is sort of an interesting story, is that I was, again, probably the top producer in the office. And we had to fill out an expense report, and it was the end of a quarter, and I'd go and do my whole quarter expense report, probably a whole month expense report in one day because I didn't ever spend enough time doing it.
Yeah, right.
And so I
I know that.
finished the quarter, I got it done, or finished the month, whatever it was, and went and filled out this book with what I had
all
to do,
the stuff you had to do.
and turned it in, and it turned out I had put the numbers in a wrong column or something. And so my boss, called me in and says, your numbers are in the wrong column in this expense report. It wasn't like, gee, thank you very much. You just made, the whole district's quarter for the.
Right.
It was, hey, go rewrite your whole expense report. And I just said, okay, that was it. That was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, and that's when I decided to go off my own.
Okay. Yeah. I don't need this aggravation.
I don't need this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, right. So, I guess I'm a little rebellious sometimes, or often, but.
Yeah, but that's
so.
okay.
But that was, it was just the time I was ready to leave, and this was what threw me over, I think.
Yeah. Pushed
And
you
so
over the edge. It wasn't like it made a fundamental decision.
Yeah, it was. It was just,
It was. Yeah. It
I
was
obviously
the trigger.
thought about it. It was a trigger. So I started, and I decided, okay, I'm going to find work to do as a programmer.
Yeah.
And so I got my pink briefcase.
Had you always had a pink briefcase?
No, I don't know if I had one at GE, but I
was going to say,
felt,
GE might not.
No,
They wouldn't care.
I've always felt that, I'm a woman, and men understand, how to deal with their sisters and their wives and their daughters, as women, and this is who I am, and I have the background and the skills and the technical education to be on your level, but I'm also still a woman, and I like having men open the doors for me, and I've always felt that way.
Okay, good.
And
so you had your pink briefcase.
That's just me.
Yeah.
So I had my pink briefcase. I don't think I was necessarily making a statement, but in sales, you need to stand out. Often there's multiple people pitching the same product.
Right.
And who is that guy going to remember who you're usually pitching to a man? And he's probably, all the men are dressed the same way. They have their, dress for success uniform on. At that point, men dress in a suit.
Right, of course.
But so if you can do anything to stand out, but also you needed to have, you had to be smart. You had to know your product.
Yes.
And you had to be on the same level with everybody else. But then when everybody else is on the same level and everybody else has a competent product they're selling, if you can do something to stand out, that's to your advantage. And so I've always felt, being a woman has been an advantage. Because maybe when at the beginning they were sort of surprised that I, knew my stuff. But once they got over the being surprised, if they were, then when I showed that not only did I know my stuff, but it worked. I would get the sale.
You get respect. Yes.
And I think there's been so much these days about discrimination, and I think there's always obstacles. If you're a salesperson and you're short, it's been proven by a lot of studies that tall salesmen do better than short salesmen. But there's certainly some very, very exceptionally good short salesmen or shorter salesmen. And I think there's always an obstacle. No matter what you're doing, there's obstacles in achievement. I mean, there's obstacles when you started Stratus, and you had big competitors. There's always things you can say, this is an obstacle and I can't figure out how to get over it. Or you can say, okay, well, now I know my obstacle is. Now let me figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so I've always, been myself. I've never, felt that, being myself was a disadvantage.
Was not the best thing you could do.
That's right.
The most advantageous. Okay, good.
Right.
So, how's this go?
So I send out a flyer, and I have my mother help me because my mother has this journalistic
She's a journalist.
thing.
Oh, yeah.
And the flyer I could show you actually says, "Have you seen this woman?" And it was like a wanted flyer. It had my picture, and it said she was dangerous to any less than optimum computer program you might have or whatever. I forget now exactly. I can show you if you like.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Okay, we can do that.
So
where were we?
So you had this printed up,
so I
and what are you going to do with it?
And then at the outside of the envelope, it had in red, "Dangerous Woman Loose."
Okay,
With no return address.
Very good.
And I went through, and of course, you didn't have computers that had everything, on the computer. So I had to get all these industrial directories, and I had to go through by hand all these industrial directories. And I sent this poster in an envelope to, hundreds and hundreds of places, hoping to get some business.
Okay, but focused in the area, yeah.
In the area, but, yes, I looked at by geography, so it was all in the area. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
And I was just actually at that point just doing general programming. It wasn't designed just for the manufacturing or for the inventory.
Now you're in LA?
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're here.
Yeah,
Okay.
San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I forgot to say.
In Palo Alto's,
Okay.
Okay, and we had an apartment in Mountain View.
Okay.
I didn't. It was not very successful, except for one of the newspapers who called and said, "We'd like to hire you to write for us as a journalist." And I said, "No, you're confused."
You're confused. You want to hire my mom.
That's right. Wrong person, okay? But I talked to them, and they said, we do have this problem. We need to figure out, we have all these carrier boys, these carrier boys that go off, and we have to package up the newspapers for them, and we have to keep track of the pennies they get per newspaper that they deliver. And could you write a program for doing that?
Okay.
So I went back to my GE timesharing service, and I wrote the program, and then I serviced it. I charged them every week. I would, print up all the labels that they would put on these packages of newspapers. They would, deliver to the boys who would go around, and then they had to go around. The boys went around and collected door to door. Remember, you used to collect door to door.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And
once a week.
Kept track of that, and so I did all that for one newspaper, and then there was a syndicate of a number of newspapers. It was the Sunnyvale newspaper and the Cupertino Courier.
Yes,
and,
okay, yeah. There were all these town newspapers.
All these little local town crier, Los Altos Town Crier. And then based on that, other newspapers called me. So I started having this business of handling all of the carrier and all the subscription services for all these little newspapers. And I also service them. So I was actually a service bureau.
Okay.
Okay, and then when the timesharing
you didn't just write the program.
No, I actually
you wrote
served
the
it, so I
program
made money
and
on
then
this
you turned it
continuous
into a
service.
service business.
I turned it into a service business.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And so that was great, and I was making money. So now I had some money, but this was. I also then got an opportunity from that company who I had written that first inventory control program for when I was at GE.
Yes.
And it was Larry Whitaker was the founder of a company called Halcyon.
Okay.
And he said, this inventory program, I'm still using it with GE. It's great. Can you sort of expand on it? He said, I know what goes into building our product, and it has these parts in it. Can't you do a bill of materials, or can't you put what the parts are that go into it on the computer, so that as we make engineering changes, we can just change on the computer, and we have an actual printed computer form of what goes into the building our product.
Right.
So I said, yeah, I can do that. So I did that.
And it ties to the inventory program. Too.
And then he said, well, now, we also have to order the parts after we get, if we get an order for X number of this product, we have to multiply it out, multiply out all the items on our bill so that we know what to order. Can't you do a purchasing system for us? So I said, well, let me see, I have to learn who the vendors are and all that stuff. Yeah, I can do that. So now I developed a purchasing system for him. Then he said, well, some
now
of
you're
these...
doing this at the same time you're still doing the newspaper service
Yes.
bureau? Okay.
Yeah, by this point I had hired somebody who, because...
The service thing was so routine.
It became routine.
Yeah,
yes.
because you
And
didn't have
actually-
to write any new software.
Yeah.
So why not have
Well,
somebody?
I actually did. What I did though, it became very expensive to use the timesharing terminal because they charge you per hour, and this was not an unlimited type of thing. So what I did was I actually converted it over to run on a service bureau that was local on an IBM mainframe computer. I translated the program over so that I can run it in batch and run it much cheaper at nighttime, because hours they charged you at night for the service are cheaper. So I actually did do that. So I went from the timesharing back to that.
Yeah.
And then I hired somebody to sort of run it and service it and do the. And they had to keep punch in. You had to punch in all the different carrier boys and how much they got to figure out how much they got a percentage of what they brought in. So that was a lot of data entry. Said I don't want to say their data entry on the terminal. So it was much easier to have a key puncher at that time.
Okay.
Key punch this all in. So I had that as sort of separate, and that business was making a little bit of money, and I hired someone to probably my first hiree. It was my first hiree. That and the key puncher.
Okay, very good.
So but now I'm working on this manufacturing thing with this company, and then he said, well, now we know what's in our inventory. We know how to build our product. We know what we've ordered. He says, now, some of these things on this order, like screws and nuts and bolts and transistors and things, they're used across all of our product line. And they're not very expensive. But some of the things in our product are very, very expensive. So we don't want to order those expensive things, the minute we get an order. Because, some of these things from our customers that they're ordering, we don't ship them for 3 months.
Yeah, right.
So I don't want to pay, they didn't want to pay $10,000 for some of the, bigger items that were more expensive and have it sit in inventory for 3 months until they were ready to assemble it.
Right.
But the screws, they didn't care if they bought that in bulk.
Right.
And he says, so can't you write us a program that said how long it took, but we also don't want to get in a situation where we can't ship a $20,000 item because it's missing a screw that costs us a penny, right?
Right, yes.
So can't you, because some of these specialty screws were very inexpensive, but they have long lead times, meaning that by the time from the time you order them to the time you get it could be a long time.
Right.
Okay. So can't you write us a program that allows us to put all our orders in as we get them, and we know when we have to deliver it, so we have the due date, and we know what goes in it because we have these bill of materials. We know we already have an inventory that can fulfill that order, and we know what we have left that we have to order, and to look at how long it takes to get that item, the lead time from the manufacturer that we buy from,
Right.
or if we have any assembly operations, how long it takes to assemble these things, and tell us when to order it so that we don't have to order everything the day when we get the order in.
Right.
And I said, yeah, I guess I can figure out how to do that. So I wrote that program. And of course, later I learned that that's called MRP, Materials Requirements Planning,
Yes,
when
exactly.
I met this guy called George Plossel. Do you remember George Plossel? He wrote the book on MRP.
No, I don't.
Okay, but I didn't even remember. I didn't know that there was a name for this at the time. I was just listening to the problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my training in, I was never the best programmer. There were always better people who can program better than I could, I'm sure. But what I was really good at is listening to the problems.
That's what I'm hearing, that
Okay.
you could listen to the problem and translate it into a program.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I hear the problems and I would think it through, and I knew enough about programming because I can program myself, but I knew enough about it to realize what you could do with a computer and what you couldn't do with a computer so that I could translate what the customer's problems were, whether it was a GE, whether it was my own business later on, into a solution, and I knew what was realistic and what wasn't realistic to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that's probably the thing that I would say is the key to what, made me successful in business.
Yes. Okay. Is having enough technical expertise, in the case of this, it's programming, but it could be some other technology, and the customer's problem, and being able to put the two together and know what works.
Yeah, and also because I had this technical background, I couldn't get BS'd. An employee couldn't BS me and saying, oh, I can't do this. This is not solvable. Or, and a customer couldn't really tell me something. I could tell them, you can't do this or you can do this. Okay?
Yeah, right.
And so I think I had a lot of credibility with the customer.
Okay.
And I had a lot of credibility with the employees because I could get in there and really understand what they were doing.
Yeah, right.
And, they didn't feel that I was, from outer space.
Yeah. Well, you could, I found the best managers are people who could, you can't always do this, but who could do the jobs of their employees if they had to.
Exactly.
Because they understood it. And they could then empathize with what's going on. They didn't give instructions that are totally ridiculous. There are lots of advantages to understanding.
And I think they also, I worked hard, and I felt if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And if my employees are going to work hard, I should be working hard alongside them.
Yeah.
And, so as you said, I was always willing to pitch in. And even if the pitching in meant if they were working hard, go out and get lunch for them or dinner for them, and bring it back so that they got fed. But, that was, I think what a lot of us who, started out, were really very much started out as teams.
Yeah. So can we go back to, so you figure, you've been asked to do these different pieces of program. Let's go on with the chronology of what happens then. Okay.
So I develop these different things for Halcyon, and then I go to the next company, and I said, I think you're very similar to Halcyon. You're building a product, and maybe with Seagate, and you have inventory, and you know what goes into building your product, and you have purchasing. Can I develop software for you? And they said, oh, we're totally different from Halcyon, or we're totally different from this company or that company. And he says, but yes, we do have that same problem. We have a problem. Can you develop a software for us? And I said, I think so. But since they thought they were totally different, I charged them as if I had started from scratch. But I was obviously able to use a lot of what I had done for the previous company. I mean, there was
always something you had to change.
There was always something, if you ever stop developing, then somebody you can catch up. So there was always something, but now I had a backbone product, okay? And I could use that, and I'd go to the next company, and I would use that as my beginning, but I would add a lot of things. So I was now improving the product.
Yes.
And of course, I would charge a service fee. To the first customer in order to be able to get these updates on the product, on what they had. So they were always happy because they were getting updates. This new company was happy because they were getting all the things they wanted. And so I went from customer to customer in Silicon Valley with all these startups that were starting, the Convergent Technology, Seagate, Cisco, and I was right at the beginning when all these technology companies were starting, and then went to the East Coast where there was Stratus and Apollo And all
Yes,
these wonderful companies in the Boston area. There were also technology companies, and thank you very much, since you obviously were founder of Stratus.
Yeah, but I didn't make that decision. But yes, it mattered. It worked.
But it did, and you remember using it for your bill of materials and so forth.
Absolutely, of course.
And yeah, it worked. And I think it also became, the venture capitalists were very fond of it because they understood how to look at the reports. So it became sort of like, here's your venture capital, here's your money. Now they would give it to me to go buy a computer. Because by this point, we were working with Hewlett Packard.
Okay.
And I should say that we never had venture capital. I started with $2,000 in the second bedroom at my apartment, as I said. And along the way, I did have a child named Andy Kurtzig.
Yes. So tell me about where the pregnancy is in the timeline of this story.
So I left GE,
pretty interesting.
and my focus was on having something I could do part-time. I thought that, children just take part-time, and that, that I could do some work to keep my mind stimulated because but I thought that I would probably quit when I had a baby because, I was going to be, everything would say that I, wanted to stay home 100% of the time with my wonderful baby. And I had my wonderful baby, Andy, but I also wanted to have the intellectual stimulation. So I really didn't feel that I wanted to quit. I had started this business. It was now at this point generating a little bit of revenue. At least I was breaking even. And I thought that kids slept a little bit more than they do. But I did manage to, have the baby and work part-time, and then I became more full-time. And eventually I had to hire somebody to take care, daycare and then night care, to take, because I was working very long hours, to take care of Andy.
Now, did Andy come along? Was he?
Oh, he was planned. He was very planned.
Yeah, he was clearly planned.
Yeah.
But he was planned.
About a year.
Had you done the first manufacturing systems yet?
Yes.
Do you remember sort of where you were?
Yes, because I have a picture of Andy sitting in my lap. At 6 months when I'm on the terminal, working on that. So yes, I was working on that at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I was. It takes 9 months to have a child, first of all. And I was not pregnant when I left GE. And I think a lot of people try to figure out how to do it in 1 month with 9 women, but it really does take, they haven't figured that one out yet. So it does take 9 months to have a child. So I think Andy was born in 73.
Okay.
I probably left 6 months, I got pregnant right away with both my children.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, very lucky. That first time, that was it, okay. I think Andy was probably born maybe 9 months sort of after I left GE, because my intention was to have a child and to do just to start something. Yeah, so I did. And I had this beautiful baby, and I continued to work. And then I did need to have help, and my husband helped at night because I was working really long hours, and not making too much money, but enough to sort of break even. And then I started going into focusing on manufacturing. I still had the service bureau business, which I eventually sort of sold to the employee that I had hired to service that.
Ah, yes.
Because I realized that this was sort of a dead end, and the manufacturing was
clearly a growth business.
Much more of a growth.
Yeah.
And I did work with, I had a couple false starts though. My first customer where I really had a full-blown manufacturing system was a company down in LA.
Okay.
And that was on the Hewlett Packard computer, the first Hewlett Packard one. I had timesharing. I actually went from GE to timeshare.
Talk to me about your transition.
The transitions.
Yeah,
okay.
the transition from timesharing, how that happened.
Yeah.
What was it that made you decide you needed to do it? I understand the subscription business, going to a service bureau because, the circulation business. But talk to me about how you got that.
Good, very good question. So I was using GE timesharing, and then for some reason I switched over to using timeshare at the time. It was another company that competed with GE.
Yes, I know timeshare.
And I think it was because they must have been less expensive. I don't remember why I ended up switching over, but I think also they made me a deal where anybody who used my program, I got a percentage of it. Okay. Now, I don't think GE did that, or maybe I didn't even try. I don't remember now why.
Yeah, but okay, but that
definitely
makes sense.
GE did. They must have been more friendly to people developing programs and giving them a percentage.
Yes.
So I moved it over to timeshare, and I don't think there was much of a move there because it was
They had
both the
BASIC
same.
also?
Yeah, I think it was the same language. So
Okay.
So I was getting a percentage of the revenue on the timeshare, but some of those customers were starting to spend a lot of money. I mean, the more the program worked, the more they were using it, and they were willing to pay, $5, $10, $15, $20,000 a month to be using that because their alternative was to go to a mainframe,
Right.
which they couldn't afford a mainframe.
Yes, exactly.
And so about this time, HP had computers that they used for instrumentation. They were not business computers. They were the 2100.
The 2100 series.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
remember that?
Yes.
And
They were, yeah, exactly. They were 16-bit mini computers that were designed for real-time control.
absolutely.
Computers.
Okay. But they were a computer.
Yes,
and
they
you
were.
could program them. And
Now, did they have a basic language?
they had a basic language on it.
Okay.
And I said, I don't understand why here's a computer that even though it was used for industrial automation and things that were, that it couldn't be used for,
Those things, why it still can't do this job too.
excuse me?
Yeah. Okay. No, I understand.
Yeah, why
Continue.
can't, yeah, why it couldn't
can't
be, yeah, but they weren't being used that. They were being
Yeah,
used
I
for as
understand.
OEM products built
Yes.
into other things. And so I somehow or another started developing on the 2100. Oh, and they also came out with Image, which was a database software. So once they ended up with a database software and basic language and Fortran, and I knew Fortran. So I think I never did use BASIC on that. I used Fortran, by the way.
Oh.
So I rewrote all the software in Fortran, which was the scientific language that ran these the computers
Yes.
that were used for technical usage.
Well, and Fortran has the advantage that it's a compiler as opposed to running interpretively like BASIC.
Yes,
so
exactly.
If you really have a lot of volume of computation, it's going to use a lot,
Yep.
lot
It didn't
less
have the problem
computer
for
time.
dates, by the way. When
What?
we got year 2000, it didn't have that problem.
Yes.
Which is
Okay.
interesting, which of course that
All
comes
right.
later. So so I knew Fortran from school because I had Fortran classes in school. So besides learning the basic, I knew Fortran.
Okay.
And so we started rewriting it all for this computer, which was a little bit, within 16K of memory and a disk drive that held, I think it was 5K disk drive. That's all we had. Our first programs were, big computer, 5K of disk drive and 16K or 8K at first, I think. I think we had 16K by the time we...
Yeah, most mini computers
Yeah,
you
we're
could
about
buy
16.
up to 16K.
Yeah, so I think maybe it was 16K, and then I think 32K, and then we had
Now,
a tape drive.
did you buy this computer?
No,
Or how?
we could not afford to buy a computer. I mean, this computer, even the cheapest one, was like $30,000 or $40,000 at that point.
Exactly.
Okay, and so we couldn't afford to buy it. So we convinced Hewlett Packard because, employees worked, 9 to 5 or maybe 6 or 7 or whatever, but they had a sales office, and I was always good with the sales people. And they had a sales office, and they saw that this was kind of interesting, that maybe this computer could be used other places besides just selling them as an OEM product.
Right.
And so I convinced the Hewlett Packard office, and it was Bill Riccion, who was the sales manager at the time there, to let us use the computers at night.
Ah.
Okay, when
Yeah,
the
the
employees
computers
went
that
at
they
home,
had, the demo
the
machines.
demo computer that they had at nighttime when they went home, and we would bring our sleeping bags, and we would sort of take sleeping breaks in the closets at Hewlett Packard while because we were working all night, and then during the day, we'd go back and sort of debug our stuff as much as we could without a computer.
Yep.
And it worked pretty well, except for one problem. Computers were new. Certainly computers being used in an application like I was trying to do. And we were in the demo room where they had this big computer, and every once in a while the computer would just crash. It would crash especially bad when during the morning hours when we were sort of there, and if they weren't using the computer, they let us stay for a while until they needed it. And it would just crash randomly, and we'd have to reboot it again. I mean, I guess at that point, now if your computer crashes, it's pretty fast to reboot it. But then
right.
you had to go through, you had to take a paper tape and read it in
absolutely.
to get it up. I mean,
you had
it
to
was,
do the loader, key
loader.
it in on the
Absolutely.
on the
it was
console.
an hour to get get the computer up, and there was always a problem. And it was like, we're in the middle of something, we lost everything because you couldn't save it. To save something, you had to run it off on a paper tape.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So this was not for the faint of heart. And every time it crashed, we were already tired, as you can imagine. This was just not very good. And the service guys would come in and try to figure out why it was crashing, and could not figure it out. They would try everything, and of course, it would never crash when they came in.
Of course not.
This went on for weeks, and of course, we were behind schedule because they had allowed us to just use the computer for a certain length of time, and then we had to be out of there. And they were at a point now, we want you out of there. We don't want you using this computer at nighttime. You either better buy a computer or something. And of course, we couldn't buy it because we hadn't finished the work that we were doing for the customers to get paid.
Yes.
So we had a little bit of problem. And it turned out, finally, someone figured out what was happening is the computer, this demo computer, was in a new building. And it was right on the wall, where on the other side of the wall was the Xerox machine. And every time they would use the Xerox machine, the surge of power would kill our computer.
Wow.
Or at least most of the time it would kill our computer.
Wow.
And finally what happened is one day, I would sometimes go, and they had showers, go and wash my hair in the morning to get ready for work, and I'd bring in a hairdryer. And so, one day the service guy came in with a hairdryer. And I was saying, what are you doing with the hairdryer? I mean, he asked me, do you have a hairdryer? I said, yeah, here I have a hairdryer. He said, let me try something. And he plugged the hairdryer into the plug, and of course the computer went down. He turned on the hairdryer, so he figured there was a surge.
Oh my goodness.
So these are the type of things that you have when you're starting a company.
Yes.
And we got by that one, and we got the program developed, and happy customer. And our first really successful customer was Hughes Aircraft division down in Los Angeles. That they made an OEM product. I forget now exactly what they did. It was a division that made an OEM product for cutting. I forgot exactly, but it was in San Diego. I know that.
Yep.
And it was a division of Hughes. Of Hughes Aircraft.
Yeah. It was division of Hughes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how we got onto Hughes Aircraft, onto Hewlett Packard.
Oh my goodness.
And
all
then,
right. No. So this was the first successful one.
Yeah.
You said that the first customer was not Hughes. You said it was somebody else.
A company called PowerTech down in LA.
Yeah.
And
that you had some trouble with that one.
We had trouble. We couldn't quite get it to work. We'd worked on it. They'd given us a deposit. And I finally had to go back and say, look, I can't get this to work. And we're pretty close, but we're not there. And you guys keep changing, and so we're going to give you your money back, which I think, excuse me, I'm not sure. I think what happened there, going back, I think we were just late.
Yes, okay.
Okay, and they got frustrated with us, and I think they may have canceled the contract.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's what happened, because we got to keep the money, I think, because we were so far along. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But that's right. I said, we're just a little more time, we'll get it working. But I think they canceled on us. That's right. Because I think in hindsight, later on, many, many years later, after I was very successful, I had heard somebody who was on that team came and told me that, we just really didn't think a woman could do this. And they didn't tell me that, okay?
Okay,
So
that
I never
was
knew
good.
that. I never knew that. And then, of course, years later, when we were successful, someone said, by the way, that was their problem. Okay, if they didn't think it, but we obviously didn't perform. So
Yeah. So
whether
you
I
got
was
it.
a woman or a man,
you can't expect
they were right in
Yeah.
saying, hey, look, we have to move on. This is not working. But whether they would have given a man more time than they gave me, it doesn't matter, because I turned out that it was probably a very successful thing that we got to move on. The company that company had problems. The guy who was the VP ended up, I think, leaving. So it wasn't the greatest situation anyway.
Yeah.
And then we ended up being very successful at Hughes Aircraft, which turned out to be our turning point.
That was your, okay, and
Yeah.
so that was your first, your
that was
reference customer.
That was our reference customer, and it was a big name. Everybody knew Hughes, and so the guy
makes a
there,
huge difference,
Jack
doesn't it?
McNamee, who was the manufacturing manager there, just told everybody how fabulous we were. And, you always have to have that one reference customer,
Yeah.
or two or three.
One
And
is the start.
One is the start, and that was it. And that turned out to be a very, very successful implementation.
Very good. Now, was that on timesharing, or was that?
No, that was on HP.
That was on an H. Was it a 3000 or a 2100?
No, thanks for asking. So that was on a 2100.
Yes, I was
And we
going to
went
say
on-
the 3000 was a business computer.
Well,
that was designed later.
We went on and we got a number of customers on the HP 2100, and they were all very, very successful. And then the HP 3000 came out.
Yep.
And that was supposedly supposed to be a business computer.
Exactly.
And I had all this work. We had all these years, and we had finally been successful. We had paying customers that were happy on the HP 2100, which was a computer like any other computer. But HP came out with an HP 3000 that they anointed their business computer, and we weren't the business computer. So what do?
They wouldn't sell it to you?
Oh, no, they would sell it to us, of course.
Okay.
But I already had all this time. The HP 3000 was a totally different architecture.
Exactly.
Totally different computer.
Exactly.
Okay?
Why are you going to switch?
Why would I switch? Okay? And, these are the tough pivot points where you get out your little checklist and you say, okay, these are all the issues. These are the pros for staying with the 2100, starting with the fact we already have it done.
Yes.
And here's a 3000, and here's, hey, who knows where we get it, and what about the time? And, this is, we've been in this business and we're not making money. And, I delivered my second child and delivered the successful installation to Hughes. After we were using these HP computer at their place, what we did next with the next customers is we would take delivery of their computer to our facility. And so we would use their computer to do the programming. And then when it was all done, we'd ship their computer to them.
And hopefully you had
Okay?
another customer, so you still had another computer coming in.
So we had another computer
So you
coming
always
in.
had a computer, yes.
Yeah. And then finally we had enough money to buy our own computer. So we bought our own 2100 computer.
Okay.
In our little space, and Roger Botterini put it together at night. One day all these boxes showed up, and we didn't want to wait for the service guy to put it together. And so he, went in there. He was just this fabulous guy who's like my father, my brother, who can put
Make
anything together.
work. Yeah.
And his background, interesting enough, was that his father owned a gas station in San Francisco, and he worked every summer at the gas station. And he went to Berkeley. We hired a lot of people from Stanford because it was close, but we moseyed off to be equal opportunity employers, and went as far as Berkeley, which was, of course, an hour away. And hired him, and he was fabulous, but he was really mechanically inclined. He was not only a great programmer. We'd all discuss how to solve something, and by the time we were finished discussing how to do it, he had it done. So we finally got our own computer. We could put together the money. I think HP gave us a nice discount, but to get our first computer.
Well, they should, because you're writing programs that then your customers are going to go buy an HP computer.
Which then brings us to the 3000.
Yes, now we're at the 3000.
So now we're at the 3000, and HP comes out with this 3000, which, if you recall, had lots of misses, but and
it was a troubled program
at first.
at
Okay.
HP. Yes.
Yes, but there were some major customers that wanted to look at it, like Boeing. And Boeing said, it's an interesting computer, but we're not going to buy a piece of iron without software on it.
Okay.
And so HP said, well, what about this manufacturing software that ASK had developed? And so here I am with this big Boeing, and they look at what we're doing, and they say, yeah, we'll buy some computers from you, HP, if ASK has their software on the computer. So Boeing gave us a deposit check for, I don't know, maybe it might have been $50,000. That was big money.
Oh, that's
at that
a lot of
time.
money.
That's a lot of money. I
Yeah.
mean, I actually could go to Neiman Marcus and buy a pair of shoes with that,
Yeah.
And so, they gave us a deposit, and they said, well, but what you have is okay, but we need all of these different features. Like we need 14 or 16 character part number.
Yes.
This is Boeing. They make planes.
Yes.
Lots of parts.
Right.
And so they
have long numbers.
They have long numbers. And we need all of these other things. And so, this is all the things you had to put into your program when you convert it over to run on the HP, which was a whole different computer.
A whole nother piece of work.
But Boeing is a big name,
Yep.
like Hughes. And so success at Boeing would have been, big time. And so we got very wrapped up in this name, and there was a very, very nice guy who was in charge, but nice doesn't necessarily mean that it was a great fit for us. And he had all these people. Boeing has lots and lots of employees. They did then, and they still do now. And so we, would work on the program during the day, and then, each day they didn't have Federal Express, but they had some sort of courier service that came from, like a Seattle, right, from Washington, down to California with all these changes that they wanted to see. So, as fast as we can start developing programs, they were coming back with changes they wanted. And they had, for every one programmer we had, they probably had 5 people working on giving us changes.
Yeah. So now maybe how big are you at this time? You're working on the Boeing.
Maybe we have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, maybe 12 employees.
Yeah.
Really big.
Yes. Yes, I see. Yes, okay. in the single digits or barely beyond.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't have, maybe 12, maybe 15, but
we're
definitely not into the 20s yet. Okay.
Yes.
And
you're not doing the programming anymore.
No, I'm not doing the programming anymore. I'm doing the selling. But no, they took the programming away from me, because I would get programs, as they're all happy to say, just to about the 99th percentile finished, and then I'd give it to somebody else, and they'd look at it, they have to start all over again. So yeah, they didn't want me to do the programming. Okay. They were better programmers.
I understand.
Yes.
Yes.
You have to figure out what you're good at.
Yes.
And so we just worked on this Boeing thing, and of course HP was very, very thrilled with it and brought us into a lot of other clients too, who wanted this business computer. And we also had a lot of other people. Digital Equipment came after us, and Data General came after us, because they all saw that what we were doing was really a way to sell hardware and computers.
Absolutely.
And so we were being wined and dined and courted by all of the major computer companies.
Okay.
But we stayed loyal to Hewlett-Packard for quite a long time, because when Hewlett-Packard was the company, every engineer who graduated wanted to go work at HP. I mean, I shouldn't say every. That's a pretty big
But
statement.
certainly on the West Coast.
But on the West Coast, yes. If you got out of school here, this was sort of the epitome of a really great company. I mean, they had donuts in the morning, and management walking around was the style of the managers, and they were very, very fair to employees. They were one of the first companies that when times got rough, they didn't fire somebody. They put everybody on like a 4-day week, or a 9 out of 10 day week. 9 out of 10, and so they were really considered to be everybody. I shouldn't say everybody, that's a bad thing to say, but a lot of us starting companies wanted to emulate the way HP
ran
their company.
Yeah, and their culture.
And their culture.
Yes.
And, in fact, down to when I had to figure out a business plan and figure out how much should I be spending on marketing, how much should I be spending on engineering, how much should I be spending on cost of goods and so forth. I looked at these financial statements from companies like Hewlett-Packard, even IBM, and except for the fact it says times 1,000,000 or times 1,000.
Yeah, you could say the ratio. These are the right ratios.
These are the ratios. And so that's how, I didn't have a business degree. So I, looked at the stuff and I said, well, the ratios, would be the same or pretty much the same. And this would be the goal. Obviously being a small company, you had a lot of overhead and so forth. But
yeah.
Or not overhead, but you had a lot of, you had more engineering than you would have other things. Okay.
Of course, you always had more engineering.
But I could use this as a goal for what was the ratios, and that's how I got my first looked at how should this business run as a business.
Okay.
And I looked at
started
a lot of the
thinking
way.
about it as a business.
I started thinking about it as a business.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, let me get the time frame correct. So you're now the work with Boeing and the 3000 and converting it.
What year?
What year is that? Can you figure that out?
Well, let's see.
How old was Anne?
Yeah.
You can always relate it back to your kids.
Yeah, I can relate back to.
You probably weren't living in the apartment either.
No, we were living in a house in
bought a house
Los Altos Hills, in fact, which is another story, but I won't go into that one. I'm probably going to say 78, 79, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Is that right? You probably can equate that to when Data General time. You were at Data General, weren't you?
Yes, I was at Data General.
And what years were you there?
Through to 80. That's when we started Stratus.
In 1980.
Yeah.
Okay, and you were one of our first customers, I think, in Boston.
Really? I didn't know that.
So Apollo.
Apollo? Okay.
Stratus, I think you were one of, then we got all the technology companies in Boston. So, but you started in 80, and most companies bought our system near the start of the business.
Yeah, we used timesharing. We were cheap.
Yeah,
we
but then
used a timesharing
but we had a timesharing service too. We
yes.
ran it on our own.
We started on the service.
Okay, but that was us that you were started on.
Yes,
think
absolutely.
We were your first thing. So yes, I forgot to tell you about that. I'll come back to that in a second because that's important. That's very good for you reminding me. My guess, but the whole program worked at that time. So Boeing did not work. We failed at Boeing. Let me tell you what happened.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So we failed mainly because, they had 5 people for every one of us, and they kept giving us changes and changes, and it was it was an untenable situation.
Yeah.
And they were just not a very good company, I have to say, to work with.
Okay.
And so we finally decided that, we could not, we couldn't work. You have to make sure that you have to cut your losses. When
yes.
you make, there's not a problem with making mistakes. The problem is not learning from those mistakes.
Yes.
And Boeing, got us a name, and we got wrapped up in the name, but that's not the most important thing. We didn't see how we can be successful with, what they were trying to do is everything they did on a mainframe on this computer that had lots of problems in itself. And I'm not sure now, in hindsight, that I think about it, whether the problems were us or whether the computer wasn't working. The HP computer, the 3000 had lots of problems.
It also,
too.
yes.
So whether it was that, the combination was just not working,
yes.
okay?
Yes, going and, trying to do something new with your software and doing it on a new computer
and having
is
a
maybe
company
taking
as
too
big
many
as
risks.
Boeing thinking that, they had unlimited control of us was just not a good match.
And you had no way. You weren't big enough to go to them and say, okay, this is the spec. This is what it has. Sign off on the spec. Changes are going to cost this much
Yeah,
each
we definitely,
change.
we were.
You weren't there yet.
We weren't there yet, absolutely not.
Yep.
And, but we were far enough along that everybody realized we could do it. I think that's, so it could have been more of the computer, I'm not sure now, but it doesn't matter because we
Yeah.
were far enough along that it was pretty clear that what we were doing was going to work.
Yeah.
And I think we just ended up having a lot of customers right about that time also that were closer, whether it was convergent technology or Seagate or that were just in our backyard that saw enough about what we did that went with us.
And we're not as institutionally huge and
They were small.
bureaucratic.
They were
as
startups.
well.
Okay? Compact, we were the first, every single one of these companies were starting up and needed a system. And we ended up being the go-to company for all of these companies in technology.
Yeah.
And so we got a few that were successful, and I remember that, we were sort of like down to our last couple weeks of money because we never had any venture capital because remember, software everybody was into hardware. Stratus can get a lot of money, Intel can get a lot of money, Converge can get a lot of money,
Right.
Cisco can get a lot of money, but software, are you kidding? That's women's underwear. So,
Yes.
software was just not anything that a venture capitalist saw as any value, luckily, because I think we're really lucky that we didn't have venture capital in hindsight. I think we would have been, it would not have worked if we had venture capital. Their motivation is very different,
Their motivation and at that stage, their understanding of a software business.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
you needed to be in charge of your business model. You didn't
And make all the mistakes because it's not the mistakes, it's learning and going to the next thing. So by this point, it was obvious to HP that what we were doing was going to work. They needed to sell their 3000, so they started bringing us into a lot of different deals, and we ended up being successful.
Yeah.
And we started getting these computers being bought and installed. And then what happened is the economy went south.
Okay.
Remember that?
Yes.
That probably was 79, 80, about the time you must have started, I think.
Yeah.
A little after that. Maybe it was a
Okay.
little after that.
Yeah, I think it was a little after that.
Could it be
yeah.
more in the 80s?
Economy, the big downturn was in end of 83 and 84. I know there was one.
Okay. So I'm not sure exactly the dates, but I think.
But anyway, you had an economic downturn. It doesn't matter which one it was.
And we were trying to sell a system by this point with our software and our hardware was in $150, $200, $250, $300,000, which was real money at that point.
Yes.
And companies couldn't afford that. So what we did was we became a service bureau again. And we took our computers because at this point, we had some money and we had the raised floor. And we had a service bureau, a service center that we used to do our programming ourselves. And we had some small companies that were accessing our computers. Maybe you were one of them.
Okay.
The other one was that was actually our first company in Boston.
Not Apollo.
Not Apollo. No, it was. They went on and they were the company who started spinning off. No, they were doing I forget.
What were they doing?
I'm trying to remember now exactly. That's sort of, I can go look it up if you want. But
No.
I can't remember the name now.
Okay.
But I remember that he said, "Hey, I'll make you a deal. If we can use your software, you can use our space. We have a big building here, and you need an office space. We'll let you use office space in return for using your software." And that was the first company that we had in Boston, and he was accessing our software long distance.
Over the yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And boy, it's going to come to me, but I can't. I'm embarrassed now
Don't worry.
that I can't remember his name because I remember him. He was a great guy. But that was how we got into Boston.
Ah, that was your first
Okay.
entry.
That was how we got into
Unbelievable.
Boston, and then he loved what we were doing. And it was very close knit. Technology companies were very, very close knit, even though they're competitors.
Yep.
They were, you got into one, it was a word of mouth thing, okay? And so we started getting all the technology companies in Boston. So now we had both coasts, the East Coast and the
Yes.
West Coast. We just had to fill in all the middle, okay? Okay. But yeah, we were,
So tell me about the, tell me about the time you said, that you really almost got down to the last paycheck.
Yeah.
You hadn't taken any venture capital.
No.
I understand that.
Well, it was about the time about the Boeing thing. I think that was about the time of the Boeing thing,
Okay.
where we had this client. We were saying we can't do it. They were bread and butter for us at that time. We hadn't made it on the HP 3000, but we were far enough along that HP saw that we could make it, and then we started getting these clients. So it was. We were really down to no one. The employees didn't know that because I never told them, and
you were getting progress payments from Boeing, right?
I don't think we were actually.
Really?
I think we got one payment, but so that money was getting down to the end.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
And we still had, I think, at that point, the service bureau for the newspaper, and we had from those 7 or 8 or 9 2100 customers, we had annual contracts for service,
Right.
for updates. So they paid us annually something for the updates. So we were getting money from that. But, we had a payroll and so forth. But then we started getting customers. And I think the first ones were using us as a service bureau. And then that's sort of like the way Stratus was. And they started using $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month as they grew. So we were growing with the Compacts and with the Stratuses and with the Apollos and with the Convergent and with the Seagate. And as their bills started getting to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, we were making a lot of money on that.
Yes.
And then they decided they needed a computer. So then they would buy a computer. And that's when we decided, wait a second now, why can't we sell the computer to the customer as well? And HP said, no, why can't we be an OEM? And why can't we take their HP's computer and put our software on it and sell it as a package to the customer and give us a discount on the hardware, called an OEM? And they said, no, that OEM is only for hardware. And I said, wait a second now. It doesn't say hardware only. It says an OEM is anybody, original equipment manufacturer, who takes this equipment and modifies it in any way and resells it as part of their product.
Yes.
And this is where I think the HP sense of fairness, which I'm not sure that every other company would have had the same,
Yes.
feeling about, but was why we were so lucky in having mentoring and sort of having HP as our partner, because they said, well, I guess you're right. There's nothing wrong with,
Wow.
doing it.
Okay.
So we packaged our computer with the HP computer with the software, and Bill Richion was the regional sales manager. He had gone up the organization by this point, and Jim Arthur was, I think, the national sales manager at HP. And they and Paul Ely ran the computer division.
Right.
And they said, okay, let's go with them and do that, which was a very lucky move for them and for us, because we became the largest purchaser of Hewlett-Packard computers in the world.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
what we did, and they actually, you go through their factories, and all these computers are all say for ask, and at the end of the quarter they say, okay, what do you need shipped by the end of the quarter? And they would work their schedule with our schedule, and so because we were shipping so many computers.
Really?
And they were obviously, our computers were full blown. I mean, they weren't,
Yeah.
So they were making a lot of money, and we were making a lot of money, and we got a discount. And the more we sold, the more the discount was. And at that point, when you bought a computer, it would probably take you a couple months to 3 months before you would get it.
Yes.
So we took 20% down payment when a customer ordered a system from us.
Oh.
And that 20% was on the software and the hardware.
Yes.
So If it was a $200,000, $300,000 computer, we were getting $60,000 up front
Yes.
with a check when they order it,
They even delivered it.
before they delivered.
All right.
Okay.
And before you had to pay Hewlett Packard.
Before we had to pay Hewlett
Please
Packard
notice,
until
please
30 or
notice.
60 days later after it was delivered. okay?
Yes.
So that's where we got the money to fund the company. So our working capital was really the float on the difference between the order when we took 20% down. No, I mean, we started that trend of the 20% down. I mean, the customer didn't know. Okay, that's what, I guess that must be what the standard.
That's how the business works,
That's
because
how
they
the business
wanted
works.
your software.
They want our
That's
software.
what happens when you're the
Our
leader in a
Yeah,
category.
our software became, so
what you had to
important.
have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And the venture capitalists certainly helped us at that time because everybody had our software and technology. So, you didn't have our software,
Yeah. No, they
didn't-
never complained.
Yeah, they didn't.
That
No one
their
complained.
companies were
Yeah.
buying yours.
So, and the companies were growing. Remember, these were the high growth times.
Yes.
So we would ship. So then we get the 20%, and that's how we funded the growth of the company totally from retained earnings and never having to have any VC money.
Very good.
Because we didn't make hardware, so we didn't have that hardware cost. All we had was
Yeah. Yeah. We're the people. Yeah. Exactly.
And
Now,
software.
had you transitioned to the 3,000 by then? You gotten the 3,000 working.
We transitioned to 3,000. We were able to buy 3,000. So we had the service bureau going that was chunking out a lot of money because these companies were growing. They would first go on like Stratus. I mean, Stratus had their computers. Eventually, they bought the computers, many.
I'm sure they
And
did.
as they grew, they would buy more computers. And, it became very easy to just, ship another computer to us.
Okay.
And ship the software. And, it was all standard. And, so.
Okay. So the we're going to get to the IPO point. We got to do that. But I'd like to go back and ask just a couple of other questions because I'm always curious about where things come from. So where
That's an NPR, isn't it? Huh? An NPR program, where things come from.
Yeah,
All things are
is
made.
that right? There is
Yeah,
one.
it's very
Okay.
good. Podcast.
Yeah. Okay. How did you get the name? When did you think of the name Ask? Where did that come from?
Well, let's see.
Or if you can remember, it may have
I do
just.
remember that.
Yes. Okay.
So Ask actually was at first Andy and Sandy Kurtzig, but Ari and Sandy Kurtzig. Okay. But my husband was never involved in the company at all. He was at HP, remember?
Yeah.
In research. He was a PhD in doing research. So he wasn't even involved in the computer division. So no one even knew this
Yeah, he's a
connection.
semiconductor guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the first thing. And when we got divorced, I always joke that Ask is actually Andy, Sandy, and Kenny because my son's names are Andy and Ken. So
Okay.
Ask. And then people didn't even realize that Ask had any initials. At first it was ASK. But Ask was what everybody called us. So it was never.
So everybody, it's
No
like
one- yeah.
DEC was digital, but then everybody called it DEC. They pronounced it.
Exactly.
Got it.
Same
Okay.
thing,
Same thing happened to you.
Yeah, Ask was easy, and as we grew, people looked at the word, and I chose it particularly because it was a word, Ask, okay, and because it was early in the dictionary. Early in a phone book, because I thought people looked in the phone book for people. What did I know?
Oh no, you're absolutely right.
Okay. There was this thing you want to start early.
Start with A.
So that was that.
Yes. Okay.
So that's where Ask came from, and the name of our program was Man.
Right.
For manufacturing management.
Oh.
And that actually started off. I had to have a name, especially when I had it on timeshare. You had to have a name to call the program up, right? So I decided to call it Mama. For manufacturing management, because by this point I was a mama.
Yeah, I think that's sort of cute. Yeah, a little bit of.
And
I
went to these austere executives like you, okay, and I said, well, I want $100,000 for the Mama program, and that didn't quite fly. I think that was a little bit of a stretch for them to give us money for the Mama program.
Okay, so the joke did not go over well.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a joke.
It was sort of that it's Mama.
It was Mama Manufacturing Management, okay?
I get it, yes.
Nothing.
Okay.
So I changed it to Man, which also meant manufacturing management. And men had no problem with buying the Man program. And we doubled the price, of course, because, if these guys thought they needed to have it, we would just double the price of the software
Yes.
to make them happy. And
Make you happy too.
it made me real happy. And so that's how Man became the name of the program.
So before you,
Which, I mean, I sort of joke about it. It sometimes takes, two men to do what one mama could do.
that's a good line too. I like that one. Okay, good.
So that's how we got the name.
That's how you got the name. Very good, very good. So let's. So you're growing nicely now. Oh, I wanted to ask.
Yes.
So when did when did you become a single mom?
Single
in
mom.
This?
In 1980.
Oh, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
It was not during this
No,
this
it was
growth
it.
period.
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
everything was
Yes.
working fine. You just moved.
Yeah,
Eventually
yes.
got a house to
Yeah.
house in an apartment. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. Well, let's go and talk about the next steps in the company. You're funding it. It's growing nicely. Now, eventually, you decide to go public. Why in the world bother doing that?
Well,
nobody wants to do that anymore.
Well, that's right. And at that time, there were very few companies that went public.
Yes,
Especially
exactly.
their software was just very few. So I actually wanted to put a board together. I had board of advisors who I had were really people from my customers that would advise me, and we would have meetings, every couple months, and I'd buy them a nice dinner. And I guess I should say pick their brain, although that's not very nice. But they were very, very.
But that's what that's the
what I was
purpose
doing.
is. Yeah,
And they knew
want
that.
to get educated.
Okay, they knew that.
And they were fine with that, right?
I'd have an agenda, and they didn't have any responsibility for the company, and they didn't have any legal liabilities. Remember, we had no venture capitalists, so we had no one who was really on the hook. So these guys were there to really help me. And I chose somebody in finance, and I chose somebody who was in manufacturing, and I chose actually the company that we were unsuccessful with, Power Tech down in LA. I asked him to be on the board for manufacturing. So I kept good relationships with these companies, and we would meet periodically, and they would help me.
Where did you get the idea to go and do this?
I was always never scared to ask people for help, and I think that
Or ideas,
and I think obviously I was a very unique situation being a woman.
Yeah.
And I actually never saw discrimination, but I shouldn't say I never saw it. I never looked for it. I think it's interesting. If you don't look for it, it's obvious. Sometimes you don't find it.
Yes.
Okay. And I mean, it was there. I mean, I had some experiences. It was there, but it wasn't a defining thing for me.
Yes.
Okay? And people. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, like to be asked for help and for their opinion.
Yes, they
And,
do.
And you ask somebody, gee, I don't understand this. Could you help me with this? How do you do a financial statement? Whatever it was, what do you think? I just asked people to help me. And then I gave them we got together, and they liked the social interaction of each other, and they got a good dinner and some nice wines that someone chose, because I don't know anything about wine. And everybody was happy.
So it became, in some sense, a substitute for what the best of the venture capital firms
Absolutely.
do, which is give wise counsel to
Well,
people
I'm not sure
who
how
don't
wise
know.
counsel, because remember,
Well, some of them do.
some of them do, but I think the issue is that everybody has a business, whether it's the press or whether it's a venture capitalist. Their business is to make money for their investors as fast as possible, okay?
Right.
And so when they're in a board meeting, they're not necessarily looking at what's best. They're looking at what do we do to make the most amount of money, and what is the exit? Okay? The people I asked didn't have any money in the company. They
Right.
did have, maybe they had some stock options, okay?
So-
But they really were not motivated by doing anything other than seeing the company successful, because in most cases they were customers.
Okay.
And, they understood the product, they understood the business, they understood what was needed. I just think I was just so fortunate in that I chose that route. It also got chosen for me because no one was going to invest in a software. But I don't think there's any chance that I would have been as successful if it was in a market where, in a different type of situation.
Well, I have to, I'm just going to take one.
You're a venture capitalist, I forget.
That's true, and I'm going to take one piece of exception that I agree that many and maybe most venture capitalists, are thinking about what's the exit all the time. However, some of the most successful ones that I've met on boards or know, they think about making the company successful. And they understand if they can build a really successful company, they don't need to worry about the exit. There'll be so many
I totally
possible
agree with
exits.
you. And I think
it's ridiculous.
I think it's irresponsible of me to have made the comment in the way I did, okay? And I take it back, okay?
Oh,
all right?
Well, you didn't have to do that.
Because I think that you came from a background where you had experience, hand-on experience, okay? I think there are a lot of very, very good venture capitalists, and there are a lot that I totally agree, epitomize, the Burt McMurtrys of the world, the Sequoias of the world,
right.
The Kleiner Perkins of the world. I have the most respect for them.
And
okay?
so I'm just,
and
okay.
John Doerr and Ray Lane and
yes.
Don
okay.
Valentine, who's a good friend and I love. I think you're absolutely right. I think today's market there's probably too much venture capital money being thrown at some of these deals.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And I think that in the time I was in the Intel, Convergence, Sequoia time, where you start down a path, if it doesn't work, like it didn't work for us at Boeing and it didn't work for us the first couple of times we did different things, you pivot and you try something else.
Yeah, right.
I think that there's a lot of feelings today that if it doesn't work, you go on to the next thing. Okay, you stop and go. So I'm making the statement in the context of what I've been seeing lately, which is not, in some cases, again,
okay.
probably not the prevalent ones.
Fine.
Okay?
No. Okay, good. Okay. I couldn't agree with you more.
And I apologize.
About what you're saying
I
lately.
apologize. I know it worked for us. When I look at what's going on today, if we had that then, I don't think I would have been successful.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay?
I agree. Okay. Let's now talk about, so you have this board.
Yes.
Or
they're advisors.
It's acting. Advisors.
They're not in any board.
They're not a board. They have no
And so
fiduciary
right.
responsibility. So let's continue
so
the
now
story.
it's time to think about making this a real company. All right? I had said that I was going to, if I didn't break even, if the company didn't start to grow at a certain point, that I was going to go back to medical school because I had wanted to be a doctor, but I had nobody in my family who were doctors, so I just have no idea what to do. So I didn't do that. And I all of a sudden got enough self-confidence that I realized, hey, I could have been a doctor. I don't even know if the story is even important, but
No, this is very interesting.
I'm going to give it one more year, and if this company doesn't do something, I've put so many hours into it, I'm probably making a penny an hour at this point, maybe that much, maybe even at 2 cents an hour. If you look at all the hours I've spent to what I've taken out of the company. If it doesn't make it this year, one more year, and then I'm going to go back to medical school, or go to medical school. I did never.
Okay.
And so in part of this, making this a real company and really thinking about this in every aspect of the company was, starting to look at what is a balance sheet supposed to look like? What should I be spending on these things? How do I really monetize some of the things that we're doing? Making sure that we have better direction when we're doing customization. Is this customization important to the base product? What people do I need to hire? And then I said, I should probably have a professional board.
Okay.
Now I should mention part of that conversation about VCs. I didn't really know what a VC was. Okay. So in all fairness, because VCs were not interested in me in software, I didn't even know what a VC was, and I did not come from a business background.
So you didn't learn about that at any point in your career.
That's right. So, and I didn't have business school. So I decided I needed to get a professional board. So I asked around, and somebody said, you really should see if you get Bert McMurtry to go on your board, because he's just, he's on the board of TriNet, I think.
Could have been, yes.
Not TriNet. I'm saying the wrong name.
I can't remember all of
But
Bert's boards.
yes, but he was on the board of a company that was very similar to mine.
Okay.
And so I called him and told him this is. Somebody introduced me. I know. I don't remember who. I think it was Ken Oshman.
Okay, yes.
Somehow or another, I got to know Ken Oshman, and Ken Oshman called because he was on this other board, and he said, Bert, I think this is an interesting company. It's run by Sandy Kurtzig. Maybe you should talk to them. And so he came over to my offices, and I had put together I had a business plan at this point, and I put together financials, and I showed it to him, and we were making about $2 million in after-tax profit, and had a couple million in the bank at this point.
Okay.
So we were, doing
You're
pretty
doing
well.
okay. Yes.
At
You've
that
gotten
point.
past the
Yeah.
I'm going to medical school point.
Yeah, I think so. At that point, yes, we were a real company. We were almost a company. And so I asked him to go on the board, and he said yes, he would like to go on the board, but he'd like to put money in the company.
He said he would?
He wanted to put money in the company.
Yeah, because that's his business.
Well, I didn't know that. It's okay. I didn't understand what a venture capital was. That's why I said it. So I think that has to go back to the conversation before, too.
Yes, okay.
Because I'm doing a little revisionary history here.
Yes.
Okay. Because now I put the framework of some of the mentality into there. But,
okay.
So I want to be fair about that. So he said, I'd like to invest in the company. And I said, really? I said, really? How much would you like to invest? And he says, well, I'd like to put at least $500,000, but I really prefer to put $1 million in. And I said, wow. I said, gee, what do I give you for that? I mean, obviously stock. And he says, well, I think he said something like the order of, well, you give me probably twice as much stock as you would if you were to go public. And I said, what does that mean?
Yes, exactly.
And so he explains, well, you have to have so many years of revenue, and you have to have so much, after-tax profit, and this is what you have to do. And I mean, my parents didn't own any stock, so I had no stock. I didn't know what the stock market was all about.
Okay.
Seriously. I mean, I know it sounds a little crazy now, but I do know what the stock market is now. Thank you very much. But at that point, I mean,
you're just barely beyond 30.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
you're
exactly.
still a young woman.
I am, and I never had that in my background.
Yeah, okay.
So my dad had a small business, and he didn't particularly think that board of directors, and he certainly did not think he believed everything he read, and he didn't think that big companies he was sort of negative about big companies.
Yeah.
So I said, well, gee, that's interesting. And so he's such a gentleman. I mean, Bert is just the epitome of the best of the best of venture capitalists. So I just want to make sure that I actually, at that point, got to see the best of the best. Okay. Yes. And he would have been a fabulous board member. Absolutely fabulous board member, and there's no doubt about that.
Okay, good.
So I have to be, you know him, obviously.
Yes, I do. Okay. Well, I know Bert Jameson, who was one of his partners, very well, because that's how I got into the venture capital. And I know Reed Dennis quite well.
Yes.
And Bert is the one I know the least of that. Okay. Those three that were all in business together.
Yeah, and then there was a whole number one, Mayfield, who took me under his wing. Who is the founder of Mayfield? I forgot. He died. I know.
There are a bunch of people at Mayfield.
And I like them all, but there was one who founded it. Yes. I can't remember his name.
I can't either.
Okay, but anyway, I think I should say all of the venture capitalists of that time were fabulous. That I knew, because there wasn't that much venture capital. Remember, we're talking about a period, besides on invention and software, of only $500 million of total venture capital available.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so this was not everybody in the business at that time. I can't think of anybody who wasn't just would
Yeah.
have been
Okay.
would have had the same motivation to grow the company and create
would
a great
do it
company.
that way, yes.
And would do it that way. So
Yes,
we need to
okay.
clean this up a little bit.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. Okay, and so I went back and realized that, gee, maybe I should go public.
Oh.
And at this point, I guess I asked, excuse me, there's some things out of order here that I'm not remembering quite right. But I do know that Ken Oshman was on my board at that point, who was fabulous. He was the founder of Rome Corporation.
I know Rome.
And Ken is who got me in touch with
McMurtry.
with Burt McMurtry. And
Who else did you have on your board? So you had a board.
Craig Johnson was on my board, and when we went public, Larry went on the board instead of Craig. So I had Larry Sonsini, who is, the
Yes.
most fantastic lawyer ever made, as far as I'm concerned, who was just, been through thick and thin for everything with me, with going public. I've never had to worry about legal issues or anything. And he's certainly been, the guiding light and my mentor for so many things. And Ken Oshman, who equally, really kept me on the straight and narrow. But these guys were not venture capitalists, although they were in private funds.
Yes.
And they did have stock. And then there was, who else was on the board at that point? Oh, and then Tommy Underberg went on the board before we went public, and he was an investment banker.
Yes, right.
So, and then myself, I think that's it.
Okay. When did you start having a board other than...
Right before we went public, actually. Okay, a year before. Because, what happened is, after I think Burt said, I was going to ask Burt to go on the board, and then he said, well, I'm a venture capitalist, right, and I can't go on the board because I have a limited amount of time, and unless I can buy stock in the company, I can't go on your board.
Yes, and I understand
Okay,
that.
and
Yeah.
I totally understand that, because that's when I started understanding what a venture capitalist was,
Right.
that they invest in these companies with the hope that they will make some money.
Right.
Because up to that, everybody else on the board was there to help. Okay, and some were still the advisors. I mean, we sort of had a transition.
The advisors were all there to help, yeah.
Yeah, so that we had this transition from advisors to a real board.
Yeah, okay.
And they had stock, but they didn't, they were there really to help more than the payoff on the stock.
Yeah,
okay?
right.
Because that time stock, remember, there were very few companies that went public. Right. And, this wasn't like today where everybody is so focused on stock options and stock. I mean, if I went to an employee and try to give them stock, they weren't interested in stock. They were interested in, a raise. And
yes,
it was much
exactly.
easier for me to give them stock than to give them a raise, because I had no money. I mean,
yeah,
I didn't have
exactly,
venture capital
exactly.
money. But so, and they would use the dartboard. They would use stock options for dart practice. I mean, you'd go into a room and they would be using darts, and they'd put holes and circles around the stock options that they were given.
Oh.
So, I mean, employees were not there because of the stock options.
Yeah, and this was very early in the era.
Very early, and the chance of making any money in a stock option, we had a great team, and everybody worked together, and I owned a lot of the stock, but no one, that wasn't even an issue, because, there wasn't any value in the stock at that point as far as they were concerned, as far as I was concerned, okay?
Yeah.
We were having fun, we were making money, we could afford to have parties, which we had great parties, and we took the whole company, all employees, to Las Vegas one year and to Mexico another year.
Really?
And everybody,
this is wonderful.
Everybody, not just the salespeople, everybody and their spouses went. So, I mean, this is how we were spending our money, that any leftover that we had. It wasn't to build it up with the intention of having it, but everybody worked really hard and really long hours and loved it. I mean, 90% of the employees were right out of school. We were all in our 20s and 30s.
Yes.
So there was a few. My secretary at the time, he was probably was the oldest, and
Really? Okay.
But everybody else was young. I mean, none of us had any experience. We were growing together.
Yeah.
So then the Bert thing happened, and at that time I said, well, what about going public? And of course, you said at that time, there were some investment bankers starting out.
Yes.
And Tom Annenberg and Hambrick and Quist and those came to us and said, yeah, we can do an offering here.
Okay.
And so I read a book. I went to the library and I copied, there was one book on an IPO.
Really?
One book on
Okay.
how to do an IPO and what it was. And I remember going and copying the whole book and, reading it from page to page probably 25 times. And it wasn't even a real book. It was sort of like somebody's notebook that they had put together that you could get on the library. God. I mean, it was not even I remember it was not even a real book.
Okay.
And I said, gee, look, these are the things you need to do. We can do this.
Okay.
And Tommy Annenberg, L.F. Roch Annenberg Tobin, who had taken Intel public and Convergent and a lot of other companies like that. And so, he made us, I went to New York, and at that point, going public was a really interesting thing.
That must have been so exciting.
That was amazing. I mean, you'd go and they had their buildings, and you'd go to the 50th floor, and they had, this fabulous lunch that would be brought in, would be catered. And, they would wine and dine you.
They knew how to work you.
And what tickets would you like theater tickets to?
Oh my God.
I mean, you got to go to any theater you wanted to see. I mean, this was
pretty nice.
This was pretty heady stuff.
Yes.
And so, we were going to go public. And I went to the board. Now at this point, I had Ken Oshman and I don't think Larry, it was Craig Johnson, I think at that point still, on the board from Wilson Sonsini.
Craig Johnson. And then Larry
came on.
Because you didn't meet Larry during those early years before.
I think I did. I mean,
but he wasn't an advisor.
No, he was when remember, they were very small too. Larry and I grew up together.
I understand.
Larry was not even probably a partner at that point. Oh, maybe he was a partner.
I think
he was a partner. Yeah, but he, the firm maybe had 10 lawyers. I mean, this was not 20. I mean, going from a non-corporate lawyer to their law firm, was a big thing because they weren't the name in the industry at that point either.
Yeah, right.
Amber. And then when we started, making a real firm out of it, then we had Larry go on the board. Not that Craig was a great lawyer, but Larry was the one who did the
IPOs and did that sort of thing.
So we were going to go public, presented to the board, and I remember this like it was yesterday. Ken Oshman said, in a few words, "You're not ready." Look, the investment bankers want to go public. They were there to make a presentation. Made a presentation to the board. Everything was set up. Okay, you're not ready. You can't handle. You don't have enough people. You don't have enough to be a public company. And I remember that was one time that I went to the bathroom and cried. Okay, I didn't do it in front of anybody, but I did it, because I was, thinking I could go and actually buy some shoes or something at Neiman Marcus if we went public.
Right.
This was real money.
They sell. You could offer 5% of your stock, and that would be worth real money.
Yeah, real money. I mean, and I just didn't have money. At that point. I mean, I was taking some money home, but it wasn't, It wasn't the kind where you could go splurge on anything. That I could splurge on anything, okay? And didn't even quite comprehend it totally, but I sort of did at this point. So he says, nope, you're not ready. He says, you can go public if you want, but if, then I'm off the board, he said.
We were talking about the process of going public, and somebody had told you that you weren't ready, and that was immensely disappointing. Is that a good word?
Yes.
And so what happens next?
Well, you pick yourself off and you say, okay, you have this board of advisors or this board of directors, and I respected Ken a lot. And I was going to heed his advice. And, there's, for a good company, there's never never a good or bad time to go public. There is some, but I think in general, I think he had a very valid point. We weren't big enough. We didn't have, all of the, we hadn't worked together as a team. I had hired a CFO by that point. I had hired a very, very good VP of engineering, although I had a good engineering before. But I'd gotten a much more professional team.
Yes, okay.
But, the team had been getting together for, a few months, 6 months maybe, and, we were becoming professional, but we needed more time to really gel.
Okay, so do you remember what year this would be or when this
Well, we
would
went
be?
public in 81.
Okay.
October 81, I believe. Okay. So this was a year before that. It was
Okay, like
almost
October
exactly a year
80, yeah.
before. Yeah. So, yes, and as a fact, when we finally did go public, we were sort of one of the last deals to go out before the market crashed.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I said there's never a good or bad time, as it turned out, Seagate and us were the two companies that went public, and then the market pretty much closed for quite a while. What year did Stratus go public?
It went public in the fall of 83.
Okay, so a couple years
I think
later.
September of 83. Yes, a couple of years
When
later.
the market opened up again.
Yeah, which opened
I
up
think
for a
yeah.
short time, and then
Yes.
it closed again.
Yeah. And what happened to Stratus, as a matter of fact? I forgot.
It went public, and it continued to grow on its own for almost 10 years, and then got to about, I don't know, seven or 800 million in revenue, and then we replaced our founding CEO was ready to retire. Got a new CEO, and
Who was the founding CEO? Who was the founding?
Bill Foster.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He
Wow.
was actually in charge of software at HP and
I
the
remember
software
Bill.
for the
Yeah.
3000 program. So,
Yeah, I knew Bill.
yeah, and he was worked with all the people that left to start Tandem, and
I know Jimmy, yeah.
and
I
he
know the
didn't.
people at
They
Tandem.
didn't ask him.
Ah.
So I think he was a little.
Miffed.
Well, a
Yeah.
little,
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's a whole nother story,
Yeah.
which we don't probably
Okay.
need to go to. That'll end up you asking me questions and
Okay.
me telling the
All
story.
right. Well, I want to hear. I have to
your
go now.
stories.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so it was too early. So now you just hunker
I
down.
went back to back to doing what we were doing, and spent that year selling more, growing faster. We were growing fast at that point anyway. Growing and just developing as a company. And a year later, Ken Oshman said, "Okay, you're ready now,"
Okay.
and went public, which was just very, very exciting. I mean, it was. I can't imagine a more exciting thing other than having, of course, my children, which trumps everything
Yeah,
possible. I mean,
yes.
my children are first in everything, and everything else is a very far second or third or fourth. But
Okay.
it was really exciting experience. I mean, at that point, you work on trying to tell a company story as best you can in what's called an IPO. Everybody
Right.
knows that is, and then you would. Before you go public, everybody goes to the printers and works on redlining this document. This document, and the investment bankers wine and dine you, and they bring in steak, and you work through the night, and then you have to do your presentation before the investors. And at this point, you travel
a
to your
road
investors.
show,
You
yes.
do a road show.
Yeah.
And you prepare for it. You do these slides. I mean, each individual slide, it wasn't like you could do it on PowerPoint and correct it easily. You had to make a slide and have it professionally made. And I remember, and I was the first woman to take a technology company public. I mean, there were not that many public offerings, but I was the first woman. So this was really, half the people who were showing up for these road shows were showing up because they wanted to see Ask, and the other half were coming to see the freak show, a woman. Are you kidding me? To go public. And in fact, it was a problem because in San Francisco, where we were doing our presentation was in a male-only place the Bohemian
The
Club or
Bohemian
something.
Club,
Yeah.
yes.
And so we had to do it in the basement, I think, if I recall. I forgot the exact story, but I think we had to do it in the basement because they didn't allow women upstairs or something. Something funny. I want to make sure I don't have it totally wrong, but that's something like that. But I
Yeah.
remember there was a problem. And so we were going public at the same time that Seagate was going public, and you do your road trip in the U.S. and then in certain select cities in Europe.
Right.
And so we started off in Europe, and they started off in the U.S., and then we flipped. But I remember a couple interesting stories on that. Was first of all, on these slides, there's so many funny things that happened that I remember so vividly now.
Yes.
But the slides, as I said, each one was like a slide you made. It was a hard slide. And so we took them to New York to show them to our investment banker because they wanted to see everything and make sure that,
everything was done just the right way.
Just right, because, they knew that this was going to be a very, very highly attended roadshow. Not necessarily people buying, as I said, but people wanting to come. And when you go to do a roadshow, it's either a breakfast, lunch, or dinner. In fact, sometimes it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the same day. And the lunches were magnificent. I remember we opened in Geneva, and they had the dessert was in a spun bird cage, and little birds in it, and it was just amazing.
Yes.
Did you go on the roadshow with Stratus?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so you remember this, don't
Yep.
you? The same. It's just amazing, and you got private jets. I'd never been in a private jet before because you had to get to these places that were and for the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And once you started the roadshow, you had to finish it pretty quickly. And so we went to New York first to sort of do our trial run. And the head of marketing, Mel Lavitt, who was head of marketing for Underberg Tobin, looked at our slide and he said, "These slides are terrible." And he turns to all of his people who are lining up the room and said, "Don't you agree?" And of course, they all worked for him, so they all agreed. He says, "The white is not white on these slides." How could the white not be white? But I remember, they were just really very, very, precise about what they wanted to see. And my nails at that point, I used to have my nails long and they used to be red. And he says, "Your nails can't be long and red. Cut them down and make them a very unobtrusive color." And they were very sensitive to the fact that, this was the first time a woman had ever taken the company public.
Okay.
And, it wasn't a sexist type of thing, although I guess it does come across that way when I tell the story now.
Yes, it does.
But it was a sensitivity type of thing.
Yes, okay.
Okay? And I never took offense to the sensitivity, okay?
Yeah, okay.
This is a situation where men are out there. They're not saying they didn't like women. They're not saying they don't want to invest in women. They're just saying that this was unusual,
Right.
Again, men were not used to seeing women be the CEO of a company.
Right.
And I think that's sort of, a big message to be careful about getting confused between sexism and sensitivity of what people are used to.
Yes.
If you pour cold water over their head all at once, it's just not going to work, okay?
Right.
So he was very sensitive to make sure everything was just precisely right.
Okay.
And we started off in Europe in Geneva. And I remember the night before doing my presentation, which of course I had practiced for days and weeks and whatever, and thought I had everything down and I knew my story, I knew the company, but I was just, beside myself. I remember like at midnight calling Tommy Underberg, who was an investment banker, and, freaking out, okay, because this was, I can see my whole life. Not my whole life, but I knew that my performance
was going to be a big deal.
A big deal. But also I knew that if I was successful, I was going to make a lot of money.
Yes.
Okay? This was the difference between, becoming a millionaire and not. Okay?
Yes.
And so there was a lot of pressure and the standards were high.
Okay.
There were a lot of good companies out there. And, fortunately, most of our customers, the investors knew. So the fact that we can say we were in Stratus, and then we were in Apollo, and then we were in Convergent, and we were in Cisco, and that we were in, all these companies that they had been investing in was obviously very important to our success. So we did Geneva, then we did, London, of course, and we didn't do Brussels, which most other companies did do Brussels. But we did 3 or 4 or 5 other
Yeah, you probably
cities.
did Edinburgh, too.
We did not do Edinburgh. For some reason,
okay.
we did not do Edinburgh or that. But what happened is, what happens in the way it used to be is that all of the mutual funds, like the Fidelities, were still would tell them how much stock, would tell the investment banker how much they've wanted. And it was called circling the stock. They say soft circle for how many hundreds of thousands of shares that they want.
Right.
And, the investment bankers kept a book that they knew who was going to buy what at this point.
Right.
Now, that's assuming that the pricing was such they would buy so much.
Right.
And so they knew exactly, and they wanted to balance it with some investors would flip the stock, meaning they'd buy it, hope it goes up $1 or $2, because it didn't go up like it goes now.
Yeah.
20, 30, 40% in a day or double in a day. It would go up $1 or $2. That was considered very successful if you went up 10 or 15%.
Yes.
And so they knew some guys would just take their dollar and flip it, and some guys were long-term investors, like the Fidelities of the world. And so they want to balance it. So the investment banker has a big job, and they get well paid for it. Okay. So we did Europe, and by the time we finished Europe, I remember Bobby Tobin calling me and saying the deal's done. So we had everything sold before we got to Boston.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
Which was, made me
Which was wonderful.
excited because I also could relax.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to, now I'm in my own territory. I mean, remember in Europe, they were asking me questions, and they all had they sometimes had an accent. And so, not only was I up against everything, but I was up against Europeans most European companies at that point would not invest in a company that wasn't a New York Stock Exchange company, and I was NASDAQ.
Yeah, right.
So by having this deal sold, and it wasn't necessarily all sold to the Europeans, it was companies in the U.S. who wanted to get in on it. They had heard.
Yeah, they heard about it, right.
The deal was basically done. So that certainly took the pressure off. We got to, so a funny story, again, this showed a little bit of I guess, stupidity on my part, but I did not realize you couldn't take, can I tell this story? I guess I can tell this story.
Of course.
I didn't realize you couldn't take Cuban cigars into the U.S. Okay? I didn't know that. I don't think the customs will come after me at this point because it's so long ago. But I knew that all of the investment bankers then used to smoke cigars.
Okay.
Okay. And if you remember that, it was, okay. And I guess that was part of their
thing.
Their image.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I had to bring something back for these investment bankers who really went out of their way to make sure that, our deal was done right. And like they always did, but this, in our case, we were a little special. And so I decided I'd get a box of Cuban cigars, okay? And so I got this box, I put it in my suitcase. I only carry on. I never check suitcases. I haven't checked suitcases probably for never.
Never.
I don't remember the last time I ever checked a suitcase.
Yeah.
Unless they make me check it. But so I had my carry-on with my box of cigars in it, and I'm on the plane with one of the investment bankers and telling him I'm so excited I'm going to give these cigars. He said, you can't bring Cuban cigars into the U.S.
Oh my goodness.
I think you still can't, right? Maybe you can now, but you couldn't.
Maybe,
then.
yeah. No, for
Just
years
recently.
and years and years you could.
So what do I do with this very expensive, in my time, box of cigars that so I had to take all of the cigars out of the wrappers and put them in my lingerie, hoping that,
Really? That's what you did?
Yes, yeah. So, we have to cut this out. I can't say I smuggled cigars, Cuban cigars.
No,
into the
that's
US.
all right. But you got them in, right?
Got them in.
You can say that.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
Nobody cares.
Anyway,
I guarantee you.
Yeah, at this point. But
That is
this
funny.
long ago. But
Okay.
and they love the cigars. So then we went to Boston, and I remember a very funny situation. I won't even name the fund, the mutual fund that's still around, but software was still very, very unique. Mm-hmm. And the analyst you'd have the the actual investors, and then you'd have the analysts who were in this big amphitheater asking you questions, basically interrogating you. You know, you have the CEO, the CFO,
Right,
maybe one or two other officers
people
with
on
you.
the stage, yeah.
And you're on stage, and there would probably be 20, could be 20 people at one of these mutual funds who are interrogating you. And they usually had a leader, but still, you know, you were certainly on the spotlight. And, you know, one of the first questions I got in Boston from one of these institutional investors was, well, how much does the software weigh? And I said, what? Okay. And he said, how much does it weigh? Because they had this calculation that they used when they were analyzing these hardware companies. And the shipping weight and the cost of shipping was one of the factors. So when we were shipping software, they needed to know how much to fill in their little square for how much it weighed.
On their chart.
On their chart, okay?
Ah!
So this is really, you know, how little that the investors at that point really understood software or the power. And today, of course, the world runs by software. So to think about how different it was back then is
That is very interesting. Yeah, people thought about.
I won't name the company, but it's somebody you know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All
But
right.
you know, again, that was the sign of the times. I mean, and so you know, at that point, I said I don't want them to have any of our stock. So I was getting a little bit, you know, arrogant about this because I knew the deal was done.
Okay.
And so we did. You know, we had what they call one-on-ones, and one-on-ones mean it's a. I don't know how you define one-on-one when it's like us against
1 in 20.
20,
yes.
you know, or whatever. But you did these big lunches and big dinners for a group of investors, and then you do these side meetings, which were called then one-on-ones. I assume they still are, with the big institutions who buy up most of the stock.
The people,
and then you know, 80 or 70 or 80% of the stock is all bought by institutions.
Yes,
maybe
of
even
course.
higher than that.
Okay.
Same today.
All right.
So it was very, very heady. We came out to California and did our road show in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And, you know, a lot of the Ask employees came, you know, to greet us as we got off our private plane. And then I guess about a week later, or maybe even less than that, you go public.
Yeah,
And then they call you at 6 a.m. because it's 9 o'clock in New York and say, okay, you're effective. And it was a very, very successful offering.
Okay.
Stock
How much
went
money
up.
did you How much money did you raise?
Oh, God,
remember?
good question. I don't remember, but it wasn't that much. I mean, we probably raised, you know, $25 million, which at that point was a lot of money.
That still was a lot.
You know, the total value of the company probably wasn't more than $50 million. I sold maybe we sold 10 or 15% of the company, of which most of it was then some. I sold some stock myself. So, and I think I got $5 or $6 or $7 or $8 million, which was, you know, this is millions.
like
I mean,
a
this
big-
is not
big
tens or 100,000s. This is millions.
Yeah.
And I went and bought a house. This house. Yeah, I bought this house.
Really?
Yeah. I bought
Okay.
this house.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
In an
Okay.
auction, actually.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
there was a down market, a down time for people. And so I bought it and it wasn't finished. I had to finish the house, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's very cool. So, do you remember how, what the revenue was? How big Ask was at the time it went public?
I don't remember exactly what it was now in hindsight because it's been a long time ago and I didn't freshen up on my numbers last night.
That's okay. That's okay.
But my guess is we weren't doing much more than $20 or $30 million in revenue.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But we were bringing
reasonable.
10%. We were making at least 10 or 12% to the bottom line. So
Really?
after tax,
So
we were
you're
making
quite profitable.
Yeah,
or-
unlike now a lot of these companies go public. We were very profitable.
Okay.
Well, most companies were making before they went public 10 or 12% at that point.
That's what it took to go public.
That's what it took to go public then.
Yeah.
Okay. It wasn't the revenues and the growth. It was profit. Companies, you were
You were valued on your profit.
you were around. Yes, it was. It was.
I know those days will return.
Yes.
Mark my words.
Okay. It was a PE ratio.
Yes.
Which meant
of course.
price
Profit
times earnings.
Yes.
Okay.
Price times earnings, yes.
That's right. Now you have all these companies that, you couldn't do a price times earnings because they don't have any earnings.
Correct.
And of course, a lot of it is because of the mode of, the cloud software, the way it's sold. Okay, there's a lot of front end cost, and so they're looking at loss, at losses. And then we went through that whole computer time where all these computer vendors were in the internet age were how much you lost. I mean, they were basically PL.
Yeah.
Price times losses, and the more you lost, which was a really hard time for me, the more you lost, the more valuable you were, and that ended. So we'll see what happens now.
Yeah.
I think most of the companies out there now that have gone public though are real companies. So
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you wanted to come back to your pricing and how you did pricing. I'd be very interested in that.
Yes.
So tell me the story. You clearly changed you came up with another idea at some point. So
now you have to remember, going back a step, is that I did not have a business school degree, so I didn't know.
You don't learn anything.
say
Better not say
practical thing, but that's
yes.
I did go to Harvard Advanced Management to the smaller company, and that was one of the most influential things I had done. I will come back to that in a second.
Yes, okay. Let's come back.
But let's finish the pricing. So I didn't have a lot of these things that you have on paper as far as doing a business. I really had to learn some from experience and some from asking people and some from watching and dissecting. I read all the public offerings. I read the IPO, the S1s of a lot of companies, so I understood how they looked at the market, and I really studied the stuff, and that's how I got my education. But one of the things I didn't know in the early days is how to get price software. I mean, when you're pricing a computer and you're pricing hardware, you know what the cost of goods are, you know what your labor is, and you have to add something to the price of the labor and the price of the materials to make a profit, right?
Right. Yes.
In software, you have people who are developing the software, but once you do it, you can duplicate it for very little.
Right.
And there isn't even a weight you have to worry about, as we've determined. So, and the cost of the media that you put your software on is negligible. Mm-hmm. So how do you price a product that has basically no cost of goods? Mm-hmm. And the labor is also not per each computer. It's spread out because you can, So I did it by the flinch method of pricing. The first time we really started getting a standard. By the way, remember, Ask was the first company that actually came out with standard software that ran on the mini computer. Nowadays, everything is sort of standard software.
Yeah, right.
But then most stuff was being run on a mainframe computer. Most stuff was being customized for particular companies. We were one of the first ones that actually took a product and said, we are going to keep adding to this product and improving it, but the product itself is going to be pretty standard, and we're going to develop it by just adding features.
Yes. Okay.
So that was unusual. That was one of our first. And so we didn't know how to price this thing. And so a customer said, well, how much is the software? And so I said, $10,000. And he just looked at me like you're looking at me right now. And I said, per module. And he still looked at me. He's counting the modules in his head.
Yes.
And I said, and then there's the annual services for getting the updates. Mm-hmm. And, that's X number of dollars. And then I said, per module. And the first time he flinched, I knew I'd hit a point, okay? He was and so I backed up. I said, but, for you only, we're going to give you a special, we'll give you all of the updates per year for one price, okay? So I basically, I called it the flinch method of pricing, which now Harvard Business School now uses as one of their pricing methods, this flinch method. But I mean, how else do you figure out how to price something where it's sort of, you can't do it by any of the standard terms or standard ways of pricing? Okay. And, it was value, I guess you could call it value pricing.
Yes.
What is the value? How much is it worth to this customer to have this product?
Yeah. And that's hard to do, especially when you're new. If you have competitors and you're coming into the market, then you can look at them. But
and so everybody else, we said a lot of things. The 20% down payment was something new. And so sometimes there's an advantage in not knowing what you can't do And, I knew I needed money, and so getting 20% down payment for the customers was certainly a way to get money without having working capital money.
Yes.
Yep.
Very good. Good.
Right.
Okay. Let's go back. You mentioned
Harvard School.
Yes. Tell.
So,
yeah. So how did that happen?
I heard about this thing called at Harvard Business School. At the time, it was called Small Company Management Program. It was one of their courses where you went 3 weeks or a month a summer, or a month a year for 3 years. It was a 3-year program. And I think it's now called President, OPM, I think, Owner Partner Man. I don't know sure what that stands for, but it's one of their programs for small growing family businesses, or not, some family businesses or businesses that are in general not the Fortune 500.
Yeah, not corporate.
Yeah,
not corporate.
And they had this, and it had all the different things. It was like a compressed MBA into 3 years. And when I first applied for it, you had to have a minimum of $2 million in revenue, and you had to have been in business. You had to have certain parameters. At that point, $2 million was a lot of money, actually, and we weren't quite there, but we were almost at that point. And so I applied, and you had to have references, and got in. And that was probably one of the most influential training that I had that I can pinpoint. And the reason was, one, first of all, you're in the heady environment of Harvard, even though I went to Stanford graduate school, but Harvard is Harvard. And number two, you're with other people from around the world who are also really, really smart. And of course, it's all done by business school cases. So you'd get a case, and then you would study it at night. You'd read it, you study it, and there were questions. What do you think this company should do? And these are the problems they have. What should you do? You'd think through it and think how you would solve that problem.
Yes.
And then you would get together with, the other students in the morning, which was called in the can, because we all lived on campus, and so there was a living room that we would get together, and we would discuss it among ourselves. And it gave me the opportunity to hear how other very smart people would solve this problem, and to be able to see would they solve it like I did or not, what do I think of their ideas, and so forth.
Yeah, right.
And then you would go to class, and these brilliant professors would put you on the spot and would ask you questions, and you would work the case through with them, and then you thought about their ideas and whether you thought they would work, and then they would tell you what happened and how the problem got solved or didn't solve. And it was just an amazing self-confidence boost to be able to feel that, the way I analyzed this problem and the way I thought through the solution in the majority of the time was the way that would have worked or did work in the company.
Okay.
And against my fellow students, against, with the professor, and against how they really solved it and what the issues were, that I saw the guts of the issue. And it gave me great confidence in my ability when I had problems and had business things that I felt if I
had no idea what to do, that if you could think through them and come out with a good solution.
Yeah. So I really thought that was just I never got an MBA, but I think
in some sense
this was really the best possible education.
Yeah, both the education and the confidence building that your own analytic abilities were actually pretty good.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting.
So
excellent.
That's and Boston.
And Boston, yes. Okay. Yeah. So you did that in the summers for...
Well, I think it turned out, they do them year-round, but they have 3 sessions. You come to the first, the second, and third. And when I started, I was clearly the smallest company in the session. And by the 3 years later, we had gone public in between.
Okay.
And so we were one of the largest companies of the group.
In the group.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was kind of an interesting transition.
Yes. Very good. All right. So let's move on in the story. Now you've gone public. What happens? You now have cash in the bank. You can go to wherever you
Right.
choose to go to get your shoes.
Yep.
Uh,
Well, from that point, we really continued to develop the product, continued to expand on it. Our customers were all growing with us. We were hiring, we were growing. I did get divorced, a couple of years later, and we did another offering, but mostly to sell my ex-husband's stock.
oh yeah,
Because the board,
you
the board
split
didn't
stock.
think that it was, it was good to have an overhang of his stock in the company. And,
Yeah, right. I understand.
Okay, so we did that, and we continued to grow very well and very profitably, and we grew in the U.S. and then we had growth in Europe.
Okay.
International was becoming more of an important part, and that was the next step where I didn't feel really comfortable.
Yes, right.
In that, that was becoming more of a focus as well, but not a big focus. But and I got to a point where you remember I started this company to have a part-time job in the second bedroom of my apartment, and my children were
Yes, and you were
growing up.
probably 24 years old or something like
At
that.
the time I started.
Yes, when you started it. Yeah.
And now, my children were getting older, and I wanted to have time, and I had this money, and so I decided I really wanted to spend time with my children. So I retired in 84, 85, something like that. We were public maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And the company continued to do well. The stock continued to do well, and Tommy actually sold the 1% of stock that I could sell every quarter. So I was in good shape financially.
Yes.
Couldn't imagine how I could spend it, and that was certainly a different thing for me.
Yes.
Being in that position, and so I decided I wanted to do other things. I mean, I wanted to go out and play, and play with my children especially. And so I did. I hired a replacement, and thought, like you need to, that this was somebody who was going to continue it on.
Yes, this is somebody
quite
you
work.
had a lot of confidence in. Yes, okay.
So after 3 years, after I had replaced myself, the board asked me to come back. So I did go back.
And so what happened that caused them to do that?
He wasn't developing new products. He wasn't continuing on with the new products. We also, after we got such a big part of HP that we had a lot of our eggs in one basket. So we did go at that time, and we had put our product on deck, on digital equipment.
Okay.
Okay, in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And so we became one of the top 3, I think the 3rd largest of DEC as well, as far as reselling the hardware.
Yeah, and DEC had some very good machines.
They had very good
machines.
Perfect
machines for
so
you.
we rewrote it again for DEC, so that was one of the things. So we had it on both HP and DEC. We did start putting it on IBM. We never could get our act together on IBM machines, and that's our fault. I'm not on IBM machines, but I think by that point, one of the problems was, we had done it very successfully at HP. We'd done it very successfully at DEC, and so we thought, okay, we need to put everything possible we'd ever thought of in the world into this new software for IBM. And, we didn't start, rough and tumble and start with a basic product and then just keep adding on to it. We were, so far along at this point that we knew that the product had to, meet this minimum level of functionality. Otherwise, because everybody knew what was in the HP and the DEC version. And, even though we put the best people on the product, we never really got the IBM version working. And I forgot at what point that happened. That happened, I think after I had left, but I can't really fault my successor for that. I think that it was a project that I'm not sure I would have run any better than he did. But But he didn't develop new products in general. Didn't add on features, and you can't be a technology company without new products.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Because then you get stagnant. So the company hit a wall as far as growth. I think other competitors are coming in. So the board asked me to come back, and at that point I had 3 years that I spent with my family and enjoyed life, and so I went back and turned the company around. I bought Ingress. We owned Ingress Database Company, and that was a wonderful company. And I said I'd stay for 3 years, and I stayed 3 years exactly. And I went back. I was really, I had sort of done it the first time. The second time was sort of the same thing again.
Yes, exactly.
And it wasn't
yeah,
as much fun.
yeah, it's the same story again. Yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't much fun.
Okay, all right. And then you said, all right.
Yeah,
This is
I
enough.
brought somebody else in who was European, and that didn't work either. But so I'm not very good at
Hiring
my successor.
people
I
that
failed,
are successful.
I failed 3 times at that, and I don't know that I know how to do it right. So I've failed successor 101. That's for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, you can't be good at everything.
Well, there's a lot of things I'm not good at, but that's one I know I'm not good at.
Okay, very good. All right. Now, something tells me in the back of my mind, I didn't read it anywhere, but something tells me that at some point you got remarried during that time.
No, I've never gotten remarried.
Oh, you didn't?
But I have been with somebody for a long time, Carl.
Yeah. Oh, Carl.
Yeah.
Were you ever with Jim?
I dated a lot of people.
Okay, so you dated Jim.
Yes, yeah, he's such a great guy.
Okay, good.
That's actually one of the names that I'm surprised you brought up that you would know. There was a lot of people.
Well,
that
of course I know Jim Tribe,
yes,
but I remember reading somewhere years ago about that.
There's a lot of other people that I'm surprised you haven't brought up, but that's
okay.
Yes, Jimmy, we were close friends. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, he's such a great guy. He's living in Texas now, and I really have lost track of what he's doing.
I know. I was asking where he was because we probably should do an oral history.
Yes,
of him.
absolutely. I'm pretty sure he's still. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's such a. He's somebody you really need to do an oral history on.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't imagine anybody more interesting, and the things he did, and he's such a maverick, and
Yeah.
I think he does teach. I think he's probably not that hard to locate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
He'd be fun.
Yes. All right. Well,
With
would
his southern
then be a fun interview. So.
With his southern accent and his, he's just, he's smarter than a. He's just so smart.
So let's keep rolling through the story. At some point,
yes.
You're not done. You thought you were done doing this, and then you're not done. So tell me all about that.
Well, so I started a company with my son that we sold, and I think that it was one of the, let's sort of want to stop the story here in a way.
What?
I want to sort of stop the story.
Yes.
If that's okay.
Okay.
Because I think the ask is really the story.
Okay.
And I started with my son. It was a situation where venture capitalists threw money, and we got a great offer from ADP, and just a wonderful thing. And the venture capitalist said, "Who's ADP?" And Mrs. Kurtzig, this is a different world. And the different world was these companies going public with no revenues and no earnings. And, again, we do enterprise software. Do we do software that runs businesses? It's not consumer. And, the software has to work. And it's not something that I think it's become very much, in some way, a consumer environment.
Yeah.
And that a company that takes investment and takes a company like an ADP to work with, that we were working with, was a fabulous partner.
Yeah.
So we had, we've had some bad experience with venture capitalists, and I think that, so I'd rather not talk about it.
Okay. All right. Now, is that the company that you?
No, the company that I started my son was called eBenefits.
Oh, okay.
And,
all right. No. I just
we-
needed to
and
know
we
that.
sold
That's not Canandy.
No. No.
Okay.
Canandy I started by accident. In
It's
2000,
hard to start a company by accident.
Well, it was by accident. I
Okay.
started it. I had done a lot of traveling and enjoyed myself, and then I built a house. I built a grandchild magnet house in Hawaii, and that.
I like the term grandchild magnet house.
Yes, if we'd outgrown. I've had a house in Hawaii for I'm actually legally I'm a resident of Hawaii, by the way.
Okay.
And so we had a house in Honolulu, and we knew that the kids grew up there with. I went back and forth, but then, I knew that they'd be coming back with wives and
Yes.
children, and that. So I decided to build a place that we could all congregate that was big enough for all of us. So I did that. I was a general contractor, and it's a really unusual and a lot of fun, a great house, and the kids love it. And
Okay, great.
It totally worked. And then one day I was sort of, finished with that and moved in, and I always have to have some project going. And I was talking to Mark Benioff,
Yeah.
and I said, the cloud is clearly the new domain, the new horizon. It's the very first time, really, that there's been a total transition. If you think about it, we went from mini computer, or from time sharing to mini computer, or mainframe to time sharing to mini computer. Mm-hmm. And we really could have the software all running on the same thing. I mean, Man was written in Fortran.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm.
So, you had different operating systems, but basically, the computers got more powerful and smaller, but the software still runs. I mean, Man is still out there. There's still thousands, hundreds or thousands of customers using it.
Yeah.
It's still being used at Philips. It's still being using it back then. A lot of companies that we're converting over with our software. So I asked Mark, I said, who is going to win in having ERP on the cloud? And he said, without missing a beat, you are. I said, no, Mark.
No, that isn't where I'm going.
That's not happening. I'm, retired, enjoying life in Hawaii, and I'm not doing that. And so he said, you have to go do that, and you have to go look at it. So I looked at it, and I did start a company to do Canandy, which is named after my sons, Ken and Andy, and to do ERP on the cloud. We very successfully cut it off the ground. It was venture capital financed. I grew it from 0 to $350 million in market value. We installed at Del Monte and Philips and Johnson Controls and Beck & Dickinson and so forth. And then I decided that, 2 years ago, I said I would stay for 2.5 years, contractually said. And
Which actually stayed longer, right?
What?
Did you actually stay longer? Because
I ended up staying 4 years.
I was going to say you
and
started
in 2015,
in 2010.
in 2015, I said, okay, look, I replaced myself in 2015. So I started in 2011. So 11, 12, and I stayed 4 years, and built it to having the product out and having it's a great product, and it's really doing very well for customers. And I brought my successor in, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. But you had to do one more.
Well, I didn't have to do one more.
But somebody talked you into it.
And that's the sort of me, I guess.
I think what we should say then is your conscious mind didn't have to do one more, but your psyche
Well, I started doing it, and then Mark said, okay, keep quiet. I said, the deal is you have to stay quiet for a year. And I thought that was my biggest achievement, is having Mark not talk about it for a year. And then we announced it together at Dreamforce, which is the big Salesforce conference.
What is his big?
Yeah, in 2011. Okay. He's a great guy. Have you done him?
No, we have not.
Okay.
Yeah. We will get to all of those people.
Because he's great. And he's such a, he's bigger than life, but he's also bigger than life in his giving and his, I know you're really keen on philanthropic endeavors, and he, of course, is right up there as,
right up
in
there,
the Hewlett-Packard and Intel, and
I know, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that
guy.
He's not only wonderful in how he treats women and how he treats his employees in fairness, and but he and Lynn have done wonderful things charitably wise, and of course Salesforce is the preeminent company in the cloud.
They've done wonderful too.
Yeah, the company's done great. I mean, and can't say enough good things about Mark, so I really hope you do.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. All right. I promised that I would give you, that we talk a little bit about, just a few minutes about, people's, women. Maybe we should talk about women's attitudes toward work and various kinds of discrimination or harassment. I mean, I don't know. Discrimination. There's sort of a line there. There's a fuzzy line there. I mean, you could way over here. It's clearly,
Yeah,
it's
right.
clearly harassment.
Yes.
Way over here, it's just so subtle that you can almost you want to just say, no, it's over here. There isn't any.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about your views on that, because I know you have developed some strong views about
I think that, I started ASK in we incorporated in 74, but I technically started in 72, so it's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so this subject about women in business has been a subject that's been around forever.
Yeah,
right?
Literally forever.
Forever,
Yeah.
okay? And the kind of, of course, to the young people coming out of school right now or coming out of school 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it's a new subject to them. So they reopen it and say, oh, there's discrimination, we're not getting ahead, and it's that we need to network and women have to help women. I mean, the subject, keeps repeating itself, and we're not getting any better. I think that women are 50% of the population, and in the internet, it's so much easier to start a company at home today if you want to start a company than it was, because you don't need a $100,000 computer. You need a $1,000 computer, maybe not even that. And so, there's just so many opportunities for women to excel, and I think that it does take self-confidence, and it does take the fortitude to pick yourself up when, obstacles are thrown in your way. But I feel that we've tried everything else in telling companies they have to have more women, and we have to do this, we have to do that. We can have the press talk about it until we're tired of seeing it. We've tried all these other things. And I think the one thing I would say is that for a woman is, just go do it. Don't wait for somebody to throw a roadmap in front of you and say, this is the steps you have to go through to be successful. Because if you wait, the world will pass you by and we'll still be talking about this subject, okay? And I mean, sure, I can go back and say, well, there's discrimination, there's this, there's that. Men have to be part of the equation. You can, anything you want to say, I'll say, yes, that's true. The fact of the matter is, I think the most important thing is for women to realize that 50% of the population are women, that women are buying more things on the internet now than men are. Women are getting more wealth than men because men, unfortunately, die younger than women for some reason. And, we have everything going for us. We're getting there's more degrees from the universities going to women. So in every way you look at the statistics, women are equal, or if not, the predominant number in the equation. And we should be able to pick ourselves up and just go for it. Okay? And if there's overt discrimination, you look, say, that's his problem, walk away. I mean, it's not, I'm saying this in a generic way, this is always the case. So I'm sensitive. There are always situations that are not that way. But I think more so than not, women just need to go for it. They need to say, look, figure out where they want to go, and if you get in a situation where men don't want you to play, you can't win. If you're not in the game, you can't win.
Right.
So if men are uncomfortable because you are saying you can't tell that raunchy joke or you shouldn't do that, and they get into a point where they don't even know what's right and what's wrong anymore. I mean, they know it's wrong, but they're in a heated moment, bring out locker room conversation that's not appropriate, and you take offense to it, make a big deal about it, and they get uncomfortable, they're not going to want you in the game. And if you're not in the game, you can't win. So I think some of these things you have to let pass. Unfortunately, it's not right, but you do. And you just have to say, look, this is where I want to go. And if I want to go there, I have to put up with some of this stuff. I'm not saying it's the right thing.
Yeah.
But I'm saying choose your battles, okay, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think you have to do that also at home. You have to have an understanding with your husband or your partner what's important to you. Because if you're not happy, if you're not happy, no one around you is going to be happy.
Yes.
And so I, from a very early stage, said, look, I have a degree. I want to use that. I want to work. This is fulfilling to me to have both. I want to have my family, which is always number one, but I also want to, have a career, and I want to be financially independent. That was really important, that I could be in a position where I made the money and I knew that I could spend it how I wanted to spend it, and I wasn't beholden to anybody else. So I think if that's not important to a woman, then that's fine. I think the hardest job in the world is to raise children. You don't get paid very much for raising children, and you can't give them back. A job you can always quit and go somewhere else, but children are forever. And that's your legacy, is your children. And so, doing a good job of raising children is something I really respect. And, think that's, very, very important. And my proudest achievement is Andy and Kenny, who are both, by the way, entrepreneurs. Andy is the CEO of Just Answer, and Ken is the CEO of IRUs. And so they're both entrepreneurs. They're both very successful. And we're both very, very close. In fact, I was supposed to go have dinner with Andy tonight. And I said, I can't do with the traffic, okay? I saw him last night, actually, and I stayed overnight at my other son's house the night before. So
okay, you're really close to him.
Yeah. So I'm really close. We travel together, and we've had great trips, just the three of us, and with all of our family. There's all the family right there.
Okay.
In that picture, that's my. Okay. And so I think that women just really have to just go for it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Good. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do oral history for the Computer History Museum.
I look forward to it, and I hope that it inspires, other men and women to know that they can start with nothing.
Exactly.
I had a very middle-class background, by the way. Nothing. I went to private public schools.
Hey, right. So that's what's happened in many. It is you were. There's nothing wrong with that, and I don't think you need to have a special background to be successful. Fortunately, the United States is a little different than England, our English-speaking neighbors, where there's much more class distinction about where your background comes from. So, let's look at the lucky side.
There's lots of things that work really well here.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.